Chapter 146. Like the calm before the arrival of a superstorm, the atmosphere in the Swamp Tower was rather strange. There were only 49 sorcerer apprentices in this small sorcerer family's resource point, and 3 of them were beginner apprentices who had just learned meditation. Yet, out of this group of apprentices whose overall strength was rather low, 4 famous quasi-sorcerers had appeared out of nowhere. Furthermore, any one of these 4 quasi-sorcerers would probably be considered outstanding even among the quasi-sorcerers. Such a strange situation, no matter where it was, would cause people to exclaim that it was strange. After all, any quasi-sorcerer could only appear after consuming a large amount of resources. In order to become a sorcerer, they needed a lot of resources and a bit of luck. With the current state of the Swamp Tower, it was already a blessing to be able to nurture 1 quasi-sorcerer, let alone 4 of them. Perhaps because of the existence of these 4 quasi-sorcerers, the Cerubo family paid more attention to the magic swamp. Apart from the Mission Hall, Krut's Secret Hut, Popular Trading Company, Deefin's Gourmet Association, Finner Pet Shop, these shops and trading companies that were specially opened for sorcerer apprentices also entered the Swamp Tower one after another. Among them, the Goblin Shop opened by Goblin Cabbie was also doing well. What was different was that 1 or 2 exquisite items would appear in Cabbie's Goblin Shop from time to time, be it magic gems, witchcraft materials, or witchcraft equipment. In short, no matter which one it would cause many intermediate and high-level sorcerers to fight over it. As for the ordinary Goblin Cabbie, he had a high status among the tower's apprentices that outsiders could not reach. Nobody in the Swamp Tower dared to provoke him just because of the 3 quasi-sorcerers standing behind him. Ever since Alice became a member of the tower, she thought she would be ordered around by Grimm to do this and that every day. Who knew that from that day onwards, she would never see this master in name again? What surprised her was that Grimm was a hermit who never left his house. Every day, he would either hide in his house and read books, or hide in the alchemy lab and secretly tinker with something. His 3 meals were personally delivered to his house by Goblin Cabbie, and he did not show his face at all. Although this made Alice feel a little less awkward when they met, it also made her feel a little sullen about being left out. Over the next few days, Alice repeatedly interrogated Goblin Cabbie. She managed to dig out all the information about Grimm's rise to fame from its mouth. In addition, she also used her identity as a prospective wizard to learn about Grimm's early deeds from a few apprentices of the Wizard Tower. It could be said that the more she knew, the more confused Alice became. If a person's life had its own fate, then Mary's life trajectory was clear at a glance. All of Mary's apprenticeship worth mentioning began with that witchcraft experiment. Before becoming a vampire, her life had been uneventful. After becoming a vampire, she began to soar, directly leaping from the beginner level to the advanced level. Only then did she have the glory of becoming a quasi-witch. So, the thing that changed Mary's life was that strange witchcraft experiment led by Wizard Anderson. From this information, Alice could clearly see Mary's development. She could also estimate the height of her life based on what she had done. Everything was so clear and intuitive. However, this kind of theory did not make sense when applied to Grimm. The turning point of Grimm's change was almost the same as Mary's. It was as if he suddenly gained some kind of magical power overnight. This often made Alice wonder if Wizard Anderson had done something to Grimm's body while he was experimenting on Mary. Otherwise, his change in this period of time was simply too shocking. In the 3 months of the mission, he had grown from a beginner apprentice to an advanced apprentice. In the middle, he had even skipped the intermediate apprentice stage. The secret to his success was the elemental puppets that had never failed him. As for himself, he was obviously walking the path of an elemental wizard. Alice still remembered the elemental puppets in Grimm's hands. Her 2 painful failures were all thanks to these hateful elemental puppets. They were numerous, varied, powerful, and very specific. This was Alice's personal evaluation of these elemental puppets. Logically speaking, if an elemental being were to be used to summon an elemental being, not only would it require a special witchcraft ritual, the summoner would also have to bear a huge burden on their mental strength. It was impossible for them to do it as easily as Grimm could. Alice had also noticed that every time Grimm summoned an elemental puppet, he would need an elemental crystal core as a magic material. The runes on the elemental crystal core also seemed to have been deeply modified. Therefore, she was sure that the secret that made Grimm so powerful must be hidden in these elemental crystal cores. Because of this, she wanted to get closer to Grimm and get more answers from him to unravel the mystery. Unfortunately, Grimm was a hermit who rarely left his house. Even though she was his maiden name, she could not do anything. After enduring for 7 days, Alice snatched the plate from the goblin cabbie's hand and stood at the entrance of Grimm's residence in his place. The only one who could freely enter Grimm's house was that annoying Mary. Even Cabbie had to get Grimm's permission to enter every time he delivered food. Not long after, Grimm sensed Alice's mental undulations and finally removed the protection on the door. Pushing open the door, Alice strode in with the tray in hand. The room was still as simple as before. Compared to last time, it was even messier. It was clearly daytime, but the illumination crystal on the wooden table still bloomed with a gentle light that was bright but not dazzling. Alice could not help but wonder if Grimm had been busy since last night and had not rested at all. The ground was littered with discarded sheepskin scrolls. Some were rolled together, some were unfolded, and some were crumpled into a ball. Every single one of them was filled with complicated runes and mysterious spell formations. Alice did not know much about spell formations, so she felt a headache when she saw such professional and mysterious knowledge. She tiptoed and carefully dodged the scattered items on the ground before arriving in front of the wooden table. The wooden table was also in a mess. Magic books were spread out everywhere, stacked on top of each other, and almost half of the table was covered in books. Grimm, on the other hand, was crouching in front of the table, drawing something on a piece of parchment. But it was obvious that his progress was not smooth. Halfway through, he raised the sheepskin paper and tried to examine it. He quickly shook his head and cursed under his breath before crumpling the sheepskin paper into a ball and throwing it behind him. Alice tilted her head and dodged the paper ball. She angrily slammed the plate on the wooden table. Due to her carelessness, the tall stack of books finally collapsed. What's going on? Grimm raised his head and looked around in confusion. His angry eyes met Alice's provocative gaze. When did you come? Grimm rubbed his temples, feeling a slight pain in his head. Ever since his strength had increased, Grimm had discovered the benefits of having a high vitality. He had not slept for 3 days and 3 nights. If it was in the past, he would have been exhausted. But now, apart from the exhaustion of his mental strength, his body was still as strong and full of energy as it was 3 days ago. I came here today to ask, how do you plan to settle me down? Just let me wander around this filthy, run-down place day after day, bored out of my mind like I am now. The facilities here are too outdated. Compared to the outside world, this place is like a wild desert. Alice angrily complained with her hands on her hips. It was obvious that she had had enough of the swamp tower these days. There were no high-level witchcraft potions, no normal food, no high-level materials needed for witchcraft experiments, and their houses were as shabby as a sheep pen. Alice could not imagine how Grimm and the others survived in such a dilapidated place. If not for the recent changes brought by the merchant or organization that had come to the swamp tower, Alice felt that she would have been rotting in this dark and damp magic swamp. Seeing a diligent subordinate volunteering, Grimm showed a gratified smile. He picked up a piece of white bread from the plate and stuffed it into Alice's hands. If you want to find something to do, let me see what you can do first. Can you throw this at KB's head? The white bread in Alice's hands disappeared as soon as she finished speaking. She dusted off the breadcrumbs in her hands and stared at Grimm with disdain, as if saying, "Bring it on." Grimm's mouth opened slightly in surprise, but he quickly adjusted his attitude and picked up another piece of bread and stuffed it into Alice's hands. This time, he snapped his fingers and activated all the defenses of the magic residence. Alice curled her lips in disdain and rubbed the bread in her hands. After a strange spatial fluctuation, the bread disappeared again. Grimm's expression became more and more serious. After stuffing the last piece of bread into Alice's hands, Grimm not only activated all the defenses of the magic residence, but he also opened a light red barrier that covered the entire room. Alice was currently surrounded by 4 layers of elemental defenses or witchcraft barriers. If she was still, unfortunately, before Grimm could finish thinking, Alice waved her hand, and a small black hole appeared in front of her. She quickly reached into the black hole with the bread in her hand. When she pulled it out, it was empty. Chapter 147. Moments later, the goblin cabbie returned with 3 perfectly intact pieces of white bread. However, Cabbie's expression did not look good. To be honest, no one would be happy to have 2 pieces of white bread smashed into their heads while they were happily inspecting their treasures in a secret room. Moreover, the last time was when a small female hand suddenly appeared in front of him and threw a piece of white bread at his face. There was no body, no arms, only a white and tender female hand in the air. Such a terrifying scene scared Cabbie to the point of pissing his pants. If not for the fact that he had received a telepathic message from his master, he would have definitely thought that he was being pestered by some demonic female ghost. Grimm picked up the 3 pieces of white bread, and with the AI chip's accurate scanning and clairvoyance, he once again confirmed that they were complete. The teleportation did not change their properties or destroy their structure. Grimm stuffed the white bread into Alice's hand again and smiled. This time, you'll have to deliver the bread to me. As soon as he finished speaking, Grimm's entire body was engulfed in flames, and a dense high-temperature force field enveloped his entire body. After a period of arduous training and living together, Grimm was now able to control his own elemental flames with ease. Even if he allowed the flames to spread throughout his body, it would not harm the wooden chair or the books around him. However, if his clothes were not protected by magic, they would still be burnt. Alice's cute face, which still had a bit of baby fat on it, showed a look of disdain and said unhappily, "Do you really think that my teleportation is omnipotent? If my teleportation can even penetrate your elemental defenses, do you think you can defeat me? You can try your best, and let me see how effective it is." Grimm encouraged her and stretched out his right hand that was wreathed in flames. From afar, the layer of flames seemed to be burning on Grimm's skin. However, upon closer inspection, one could see that there was a layer of crimson elemental membrane that was intimately attached to Grimm's skin, isolating his skin from the elemental flames. This was the product of the combination of a body of flames and a high-temperature force field. If one day Grimm could become a wizard and turn his power of the will into an elemental form, this thin film would disappear completely and he would become a postnatal elemental life form. When the time comes, even if his life force was not as endless as those true elemental life forms, it would be long enough for him to slowly explore the endless multiverse. Under Grimm's gaze, the void around his flame-wreathed right hand began to ripple. Alice's bread obviously could not pass through the dense and tough high-temperature force field and was forcibly squeezed out of the space layer by the force field. Without the protection of the spatial force, the instant the white bread came into contact with the protective flames, it was reduced to ashes. Grimm then retracted his flame protection and high-temperature force field, but Alice still couldn't teleport the items to him. Although this made him feel slightly regretful, it was also reasonable. If Alice's space teleportation could even penetrate the elemental defense of her target, then no matter how big the world was, which opponent of the same level could be her opponent? She could definitely teleport a bottle of explosive potion into the opponent's heart, or stuff a fireball into the opponent's stomach. Just the thought of it sent chills down one's spine. After failing to do so many times, Alice finally became impatient. "What do you want me to do? Just take something and teleport it around? I just need you to be able to give me what I need at special times." Grimm once again expanded his high-temperature force field, enveloping both him and Alice within it. Only then did he seriously state his purpose. Alice looked around and saw this barrier that was obviously used to prevent outsiders from spying on them. She nodded silently as if she understood something. However, she immediately put her hands on her hips and said disdainfully, "Why should I listen to you and do something that's impossible? Don't expect me to help you if there's no benefit in it." Grim smiled and flipped his palm. An elemental crystal core that was enshrouded in powerful elemental energy appeared in his hand. Looking at the dazzling appearance, the crystal clear texture, and sensing the tide-like elemental rhythm, Alice couldn't help but swallow her saliva. It was the Magus crystal core. This was the original appearance of the terrifying lava monster that defeated her. But looking at it now, not only did it not give off a sense of fear, it even had a hint of magnificence and perfection. "You want to give it to me?" At this moment, Alice's breath almost stopped. Her eyes were wide open as she held her breath, waiting for Grim's answer. "Of course I can't give it to you now," Grim replied impatiently. "But if you can teleport anything to me within a month, then you can have it temporarily." Hearing Grim's answer, Alice was first sad, but then she became energetic again. "Do you mean it? Don't worry. As long as I work hard and practice more, I can definitely do it. But I need to inspect this treasure of yours first. Let me play with it for the whole night." Grim hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded in agreement. However, when he placed the Flame Lord crystal core into Alice's hand, Grim solemnly warned her, "If you want to play with it, you can, but you can't damage its body. And when you take it out, make sure to take care of your defenses." At this point, Grim pointed at the ceiling. Alice nodded in understanding. This was the Swamp Tower and Grim's personal residence. He even had to rely on his elemental defense to speak, and he did not consider using the defensive spells in his residence. This point alone was enough to explain the problem. From this, it could be seen that Grim did not have a good relationship with a Magus stationed in the Swamp Tower. It was to the point where they were at loggerheads. Considering that her life was now tied to Grim, Alice could not help but think about this little group of people. Although Grim did not say it clearly, Alice could feel it. His request was very important to him, to the point where it could affect his life and future. "I'll help him. Otherwise, if he dies, I'll die with him." Moreover, his request sounded very fun. If he could really integrate it into his own attacks, it might be a big breakthrough. With a faint reverie, Alice casually stuffed the demon puppet crystal core into an open void hole, then turned around and left Grim's residence. Compared to Grim, Alice did not need any magic equipment like a pouch or a storage belt. She only needed to open up a sealed space with her consciousness in a safe space, where she could store some of her personal belongings. However, with her quasi-wizard level spiritual power, this sealed space was at most 5 meters in size. After Alice left, Grim was the only one left in the room. He still did not remove the high-temperature force field. At this moment, a hoarse voice suddenly came from his body. "Is this your plan? It doesn't look like much. Are you sure you can fool Anderson?" Grim's shirt wriggled, and a fingernail-sized black beetle crawled out and lay on his shoulder motionlessly. The voice just now was made by the beetle. Intik, what's the point of making sarcastic remarks now? If you weren't at your wit's end, you wouldn't have come to me for help." Grim coldly replied, "Hee, this is just a win-win situation." The beetle Grim called Intik vibrated its wing sheath and hissed, "Can't you tell from the information I gave you that Anderson not only covets me and Mary, but he has also recently set his eyes on you and this little girl? If we don't do anything, I'm afraid we'll really be cooked by Anderson and become the cornerstone of his flesh sacrifice." Grim became silent. Intik was very accurate about this. Based on all the information, Anderson was really a crazy magus who would eat people without spitting out their bones. In order to increase his strength, he had already arranged a terrifying flesh sacrifice. Once the time was ripe, this swamp tower would immediately become a graveyard, and the acolytes here would not be able to escape the fate of becoming sacrifices. Low-ranked acolytes might only be charcoal to heat up the furnace, but they, the quasi-magi and high-ranked acolytes, were the main ingredients of this flesh sacrifice. At this time, it would be foolish to act selflessly. Perhaps it was because Tick had seen through this point that he dared to put the remnants of his main consciousness on this beetle and come to Grimm to discuss the matter of joining forces. As for escaping the Swamp Tower and never looking back, Grimm had never thought of such a thing. This was the Magus continent. Almost all the areas where humans lived were under the strict control of Magi. If Grimm wanted to escape without a fight, Magus Anderson only needed to use some tricks and label them as traitorous acolytes. At that time, no matter how high the sky was or how wide the earth was, there would be no place for them to hide. This was something that could be seen from the fallen Magi and acolytes in the gloomy crypt. Therefore, facing this Tick who had come alone, Grimm could only suppress the disgust in his heart and form a preliminary strategic alliance with him. Chapter 148. Using the identity of a quasi-magus to fight against an old magus who had advanced for more than 300 years was a crazy idea. If not for the fact that he had no other way out, Grimm would never dare to think of such a thing. Counting with his fingers, he only had 3 good men on his side. The evil insect's body was already completely under Anderson's control. Although Tick's consciousness had turned into a beetle and promised that he could take back his body in a short period of time, such words were not trustworthy. Hence, Grimm had always treated Tick as half a quasi-magus. It was already good enough that he did not help Anderson at the crucial moment, so Grimm never dared to place his hopes of victory on him. Mary, on the other hand, was a reliable helper. It was a pity that her vampire bloodline came from Anderson. If Anderson did not leave any backup plans, Grimm would really look down on Anderson for being an incompetent magus. Knowledge was power. Truly intelligent Magi relied on their brains and knowledge to defeat their enemies. Hence, Grimm was a little worried about Mary's abilities. Just like the demonic worm in Tick, Grimm also considered Mary as a half-quasi-sorcerer when calculating her combat power. In this iron triangle that was firmly defending against Anderson, there were actually 2 people that he could not be at ease with. One could imagine how depressed Grimm was at the moment, and how much pressure he was under. It seemed like he was the only one who could go up at the crucial moment. As for the enemy they had to face, the rank 1 Magus Anderson, according to the AI Chip's estimations, he had the battle prowess of 8 or 10 quasi-magi. In other words, even without the support from the Swamp Tower and the enhancement from the additional witchcraft equipment, Anderson alone could easily resist the siege of 8 to 10 quasi-sorcerers. Of course, if there were really 10 quasi-magi, they might have been able to force Anderson to give in. Unfortunately, they did not. There were too many variables on Tick and Mary. Once the battle started, the possibility of them becoming a burden was much higher than a help. If he had a choice, Grimm would not be willing to form an alliance with teammates that could betray him at any time. This way, when the battle started, most of the pressure would fall on Grimm's shoulders. Since the birth of the Flame Lord, Grimm's strength had undergone earth-shattering changes. He could already be considered a qualified quasi-sorcerer. Whether it was offense or defense, he was not inferior to an ordinary quasi-sorcerer. If he went all out, he could even support 2 Flame Lords on the battlefield at the same time. From the battle between the Flame Lord and Alice, it could be seen that the combat power of a wizard-level Flame Lord was equivalent to 2 to 3 elemental quasi-wizards. Even if the 2 Flame Lords were to be calculated according to their maximum combat power, they would only be comparable to 6 elemental quasi-sorcerers. With such combat strength, coupled with Grimm, Tick, and Mary, it could only be said that they had a fighting chance against Anderson. As for winning or losing, Grimm's chances of winning were less than 10%. Even this 10% chance of winning was only possible if all of Grimm's plans were successful, and Wizard Anderson did not arrange anything too shocking. It was precisely because the odds were too low that Grimm had to work hard to increase his side's chips and reduce Anderson's advantage. Looking at it seriously, Grimm's side actually had some hidden tricks up their sleeves. The biggest good news was that the evil bug in Tick could continuously provide information on the enemy. As the saying goes, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. In Grimm's plan, he had to fully understand Wizard Anderson's layout and plan, and then counterattack accordingly. This was the safest strategy. On the other hand, Grimm's side also had a hidden super expert, Alice. Although her relationship with Grimm was still not good, when her life was threatened, she would become the main fighting force of Grimm's side. At least in Grimm's heart, Alice was much more reliable than Tick and Mary. In order to increase the chance of winning, even if it was just a small chip, Grimm had to carefully plan and plan. Even Goblin Cappy had to take on some extremely important tasks in his plan. While planning his counterattack, Grimm was also working hard to increase his survival ability. One could imagine that once both sides shed all pretenses of cordiality and started fighting, Grimm, the main force of his side, would definitely become the main target of Wizard Anderson. Therefore, training his fighting ability was not as important as increasing his survival ability on the battlefield. Through a large number of screening and comparison methods, there weren't many methods that could improve one's abilities in a short period of time. However, the creation of Magewez was definitely a special case. According to the records of witchcraft, the origin of witchcraft came from the observation and copying of natural magic patterns on the bodies of magical beasts. Most of the time, these magical beasts and creatures did not know any witchcraft knowledge, nor did they understand the principles of witchcraft. However, they relied on their natural talent and the harmony of the world to master some mysterious ability without a teacher. Although these magic patterns were simple, they were directly related to the laws of the world. They were the embodiment of some of the laws of the lowest planes. Therefore, they all had strange abilities that left people speechless. Their ancestors did not understand all of this at first, but humans were the race that were the best at learning and creating in the world. Some of the smarter ones among them had observed and copied these natural magic patterns, and then drew them on their bodies, forming the acquired magic patterns. This was the origin of the witchcraft circle. Later on, their ancestors learned and mastered more and more magic patterns. After sifting through them, they continued to combine and arrange them, giving themselves new abilities that they had never seen before. These special runes, which were extracted from natural magic patterns, were the runes that every magus had to understand and master. It could be said that ancient sorcerers were actually a group of ordinary humans. They used special pigments to draw strange and peculiar Mageweth lines on their bodies, which gave them strange abilities similar to magical beasts and monsters. After thousands of years of evolution, these humans who continuously studied the occult finally got rid of their identity as normal humans and became the leaders and protectors of the entire human race. They no longer drew magic patterns on their bodies. Instead, they etched them on weapons or special equipment, turning them into terrifying witchcraft tools and equipment. They even learned meditation and could gradually transform themselves into magical creatures similar to magical beasts. They had also thoroughly analyzed the laws of the plane and thus branded their own consciousness imprints in the operation of the plane world. What Grimm wanted to rely on the study of magic patterns the most was to quickly increase his basic combat strength. The discarded parchments that Alice had seen in Grimm's room were the rune arrays that Grimm had custom-made for himself. Grimm had originally thought that this task would not be too difficult. After all, he was a puppet master who could etch 7 spell formations on a crystal core the size of a fingernail. Now that he had shifted the formation to his own body, the area had expanded by more than 100 times. The task should have been even easier. Unfortunately, when he actually gave the task to the AI chip, after a comprehensive body inspection and statistics, he found that less than 1/7 of a human's body could be used to draw magic patterns. Moreover, these areas were scattered all over the body, making it look extremely broken and messy. Based on the distribution of the magic patterns, Grimm deduced that the magic energy on the surface of a human's body was mostly connected to the main organs of the body. For example, the heart, brain, and abdomen were all areas where magic energy was concentrated, while the limbs and the edges of the body were the areas where magic energy was sparse. The organs that connected to each area were different, and the amount of magic energy they could support was also slightly different. In order to make good use of these areas, he really needed a comprehensive analysis and a large amount of statistics and calculations. It was no wonder that magic pattern masters were so rare and the cost of drawing a magic pattern was so high. According to Grimm's information, if a normal acolyte wanted to draw a magic pattern on their body, even if it was just an agility rune formation, agility +1, on their feet, it would cost a minimum of 1,000 magic crystals. As for an energy-gathering rune formation, element-gathering speed doubled, on the heart, it would cost 3,000 magic crystals at the very least. Drawing a rune formation that could allow one's eyes to see through things would cost as much as 5,000 magic crystals. Seeing the exorbitant prices, Grimm felt his heart wrench. Perhaps in the future, when he had nothing to do, becoming a magic pattern master would not be a bad choice. As Grimm had already completed the transformation into a body of fire, the area of magic energy on the surface of his body was far greater than that of a normal acolyte. Hence, how to make good use of these areas was the biggest problem. Hence, during this period of time, Grimm had not taken a single step out of his residence. He was constantly testing the characteristics of his body's area, and then using the AI chip to construct the most perfect magic pattern. From this, one could see why Grimm had rarely seen any magi with magic patterns on their bodies despite having seen so many of them. In order to draw a magic pattern master needed to have a detailed and comprehensive understanding of their body's data, which magus would be willing to let an outsider know all the secrets of their body. Hence, this was probably an important factor that hindered the spread of magic patterns. After a series of detailed calculations, Grimm had drawn up a plan to draw a magic pattern that was unprecedentedly large and complicated. He planned to engrave an energy-gathering glyph array on the soles of both feet, a damage multiplier glyph array on both hands and wrists, able to instantly increase the elemental output, causing the elemental damage to be doubled, a large elemental strengthening glyph array on his chest, a large elemental protection glyph array on his back, and a spiritual light glyph array on his forehead and temples, able to directly convert spiritual power into destructive fire spells. Chapter 149. Engraving runes on one's own body was not something that could be done easily. Special rune materials, a mageweth with a strange talent, unique drawing experience and skills. These were all indispensable, but Grimm did not have any of them. Swamp Tower, in the alchemy laboratory. Dozens of illumination crystals illuminated the room, leaving not a single shadow. Grimm did not stand in front of the operating table like he usually did. Instead, he lay down on the alchemy table. He was the operator today, and the target of the refinement was also him. Without the special materials needed to draw the runes, Grimm could only use the method of refining runes. Without a specialized mageweth, Grimm could only draw the runes himself. Without the experience and skills that had been passed down from generation to generation, he had to rely on the AI, chip's optimal configuration, and spirit simulation experiments. Today, Grimm was destined to be a calf that broke into a porcelain shop. He would overturn all the bottles and jars that represented past experience and rules, and then carve out a path that belonged to him. In the normal process of drawing a rune, a mageweth would usually need the assistance of some medicine to reduce the regeneration of a target's flesh. This was because a rune array with complete functions was formed from hundreds or even thousands of runes and magic lines. If he met someone with a high vitality, the first rune line would have already healed before the last rune line was completed. This would ruin the entire drawing of the mageweth. That was why special drugs were used to anesthetize and suppress the target's physical regeneration ability. Then, meticulously mixed mageweth materials were used to corrode the target's skin to form the corresponding mageweth. Then, the mageweth would connect the mageweth to the target's magical organs. This was the theoretical basis for the stimulation of the human body with magic runes. It was precisely because the process of drawing a rune was so complicated and trivial that the importance of a mageweth was highlighted. Some people, in order to save a large amount of magic crystals, tried to use the simplest method to draw their own runes. Such runes would be effective for a short period of time, but as the body healed, all external changes would eventually fade away. Very soon, they would realize that they were drawing water with a wicker basket. Not only would the runes not be able to be permanently solidified, they would also have to pay a considerable amount of material fees. The Balrog transformation Mageweth set that Grimm had custom-made for himself was also one of them. However, with his extremely high control over his body of flames, the process of losing its effect would definitely be delayed. Moreover, he did not expect the Mageweth suit to be effective forever. He just wanted it to survive this calamity. Grimm lay down on the alchemy table and activated the alchemy device with his mind power. As the needle-like heat rays hit his body, Grimm could smell the burning smell of flesh and fat, and he could also hear the sizzling sound of fat boiling. The light slowly swam across the surface of his body, scorching his skin black and leaving behind shallow pits. Grimm remained expressionless as he endured the burning of the light beam. He also had to suppress the instinctive defense and counterattack of his flaming body against the scorching rays. He also had to restrain the regeneration speed of his flesh. While the shallow pits had yet to heal, Grimm commanded another alchemy arm to pour in the filler that he had prepared beforehand. For a moment, the sizzling sound of the light beam burning his flesh and the stench of the special filler slowly corroding his flesh filled the entire alchemy lab. It made him feel like he had arrived at a dark and ugly execution room. He had to draw a complicated and obscure rune array on a certain part of his body, and the core node of the rune array had to completely coincide with the mana points in his body. Any deviation would cause the entire rune array to be scrapped. That was why, even though the pain on the surface of his body stimulated his nerves, Grimm continued to watch the spots of light dancing on his skin without batting an eyelid. He watched as his skin turned red, softened, collapsed, turned black, and finally turned into charcoal. There were 14 rune arrays all over his body. Each of them was independent and had the effect of stimulating a certain part of his body. However, once they were activated, they could combine into an unusually complicated and mysterious set of Mageweths, the Balrog transformation. This was the direction that Grimm had set for himself to advance in fire magic. The Balrog was a terrifying abyssal creature from the underworld. They usually had a tall and powerful body, but their combat ability came from the incomparably terrifying power of fire. Once they were enraged, their entire body would burn into a terrifying, flaming man. Any living being that got close to them would have to bear continuous fire damage. Without extremely high resistance to fire, ordinary enemies would not even be qualified to fight them. They would be burnt into a pile of coke by the continuous fire. Those who were qualified to stand in front of the Balrog would have to face an overwhelming number of violent fire spells, as well as the Balrog's melee skills that were not inferior to that of ordinary demons. The Balrog might not be the strongest among the fire elemental experts, but they were the most outstanding group of fire elemental spells. Therefore, Grimm had drawn 14 rune arrays on his body to fully stimulate his potential and simulate part of the Balrog's abilities. This was also the main reason why the Mageweth set was called the Balrog transformation. Of course, this was only part of Grimm's initial plan and conjecture. If he really wanted to make his Balrog transformation live up to its name, the most direct way was to go to the underworld to kill and dissect a Balrog. Now, all he could do was to imitate and improve on it. The process of drawing the rune lasted for a whole day and night. It was not until noon the next day that Grimm dragged his exhausted body back to his residence. Waiting for him was Mary, who had just returned from a trip. Seeing that Grimm was exhausted but still trying his best to stay awake, Mary's pretty face showed a sad expression. After helping Grimm to lie down on the bed, Mary stroked his face and said softly, "Have a good sleep. I'll be here to protect you." Grimm forced a smile and immediately fell into a deep sleep. In another room, inside a faint transparent force field barrier, Alice was fondly playing with a wizard-level elemental crystal core. Under the soft and bright light of the illumination crystal, the fist-sized crystal core was emitting a breathtaking light. Every time it changed its angle, the crystal core would emit a gorgeous yet unique halo. Alice's gaze fell on it and showed an intoxicated expression, unable to break free for a long time. With her eyesight, she could obviously see the crystal nucleus and the complicated and profound magus formation that was as fine as a cow's hair. No matter how she looked at it, it was a great work of art. Using the ingenious design of the spell formation, the special energy within the elemental crystal core was stimulated and combined with the vast elemental energy gathered from the outside world. Thus, a terrifying wizard-level elemental puppet that could destroy the world was born. At the thought that she was defeated by such a crystal-clear and extremely beautiful little thing, there was an inexplicable anger rising in Alice's heart. But soon after, this anger was slowly dissolved by the mysterious light of the elemental crystal core. That's right, I also promised that bastard. Io, master one thing. Looks like I need to hurry up and practice. Alice rolled around on the bed without caring about her image. She slowly extended her mental strength, and through the trace of mental connection brought by the spell contract in the depths of her soul, she silently determined the other party's location. That, in his residence, there was no comprehensive protection activated. His mental strength also seemed low and deep, so he should be sleeping. Wow, isn't this the best opportunity? I just need to pass something to him, and this treasure will accompany me for a few more days. With an excited mood, Alice stretched out her hand and drew an incantation in the air. She then took out an earring and threw it over. The incantation was enveloped by an abnormally complicated wizard's ring. The earring passed through it as if it had passed through a transparent water mirror and disappeared in an instant. In another room, a dense incantation suddenly appeared in Grimm's right hand. As the incantation vibrated, an exquisite earring slowly passed through the air and was about to fall into Grimm's hand. Asterisk pack. Asterisk Mary waved her hand, and the earring immediately flew to the corner of the room. Oomph. It's that little girl again. Oomph. Secretly giving an earring. It's obvious that she's up to no good. The moment the earring was slapped away, Alice immediately sensed it. What's going on? I was about to succeed, so why was it suddenly slapped away? Could it be a new defensive mechanism? No, let me try again. Unsurprisingly, the second time, the third time, all of Alice's attempts were interrupted by a strange defensive mechanism. This, on the other hand, aroused her fury even more. What's going on? The guy is clearly asleep. So how can he still have such a strange defensive mechanism? You forced me to do this. Gritting her teeth, Alice quickly waved her hands in the air, activating 4-space incantation at the same time. However, before she could pass the item over, the 4-space incantations on Grimm's body suddenly disappeared. Damn it, you're challenging me. Alice, who had her competitive spirit aroused, immediately began to try again and again, but every time she tried, she was destroyed. This made her even angrier, and she tried even harder. In Grimm's residence, Mary yawned and stretched her body, while reaching out her finger and quickly stabbing in the air. Any space incantation would be pierced by Mary's finger before it could establish a stable, small space channel in the distance. Chapter 150. In the dark and damp room, a blood-drenched wizard formation came into view. This was a mysterious wizard formation that was created by mixing the blood of 7 types of monsters. All the runes and magic lines that formed the wizard formation were drawn with fresh blood. There was a hint of blood in the warmth, and there was a hint of demonic charm in the strangeness. In the corner of the room, there were countless shriveled corpses of swamp monsters. All of them had died tragically and were scattered all over the place. It was chilling to look at. Eagle-Eye Cruisar, one of the 3 strongest apprentices of the Wizard Tower, was sitting cross-legged in the wizard ring in the middle of the wizard formation. His body was drenched in the pungent blood of the monsters. Outside the wizard formation, the madwoman was silently leaning on her sword. No one knew what she was thinking. Soon, a series of strange murmurs came from the wizard formation. Countless black-feathered, red-eyed crows flew in through the open narrow window and pounced into the blood-colored wizard formation. Every red-eyed crow that pounced into the wizard formation exploded into flesh and blood. Black feathers scattered everywhere, and before they landed on the ground, they turned into smoke. Their flesh and blood turned into countless blood snakes that had shed their snakeskin. They gathered outside the wizard ring where Eagle-Eye Crusoe was and entrenched themselves. When a number of blood snakes gathered was enough, Crusoe flashed away from the central wizard ring and appeared beside the madwoman. "All right, the wizard formation has been activated. It's your turn now." Crusoe looked around the room and nodded in satisfaction. A sinister and terrifying smile appeared on his face. Even at the last moment, the madwoman still had a trace of hesitation. She could not help but ask, "Crusoe, are you sure that this blood sacrifice wizard formation can stimulate the growth of my physique? Why do I feel a trace of danger in this wizard formation?" Crusoe sneered and said, "At our level, it's simply a daydream to gain strength without paying a price." "Danger? Which blood sacrifice wizard formation isn't dangerous? This is the only blood sacrificial sorcerer formation that is of use to you within our capabilities. If it wasn't for the fact that this blood sacrifice wizard formation focuses on improving physique, do you think I would be so generous to give you the opportunity to improve your strength? Remember, if you become a prospective wizard, you must help me complete that mission." A trace of unswerving determination flashed across the madwoman's fierce face. She was no longer hesitant. Following the dull thumps, she finally took off her thick witchcraft armor and her dress, revealing her perfect, strong body, and stepped into the witchcraft formation naked. When she sat cross-legged in the center of the wizard ring, Cruiser's scarlet eyes flashed with a cold light. He pursed his lips and let out a low and hoarse howl. Thus, the number of red-eyed ravens that swooped in from outside the window increased, and the number of blood snakes that gathered outside the wizard ring increased as well. Thousands of heads swarmed about. Their scarlet bodies were densely packed and stacked on top of each other, causing one's heart to tremble with fear. The madwoman, who was sitting cross-legged in the wizard ring, immediately sensed the surging blood waves surging into her body. Her body factor, which had been stagnant for a long time, once again glowed with exuberant vitality under the stimulation of the blood waves. It began to slowly but firmly grow. The madwoman deliberately suppressed her body's rejection of these external forces and allowed the blood waves to sweep through her body and mind. However, at the same time that her strength increased, the madwoman vaguely sensed that something was wrong. While the blood waves were stimulating the potential of her body, they seemed to be slowly eroding her nervous system. This caused her control over her body to begin to plummet. This seemed to be a little different from the process that Eagle-Eye Crusoe had described to her. The madwoman struggled to sit up straight and wanted to open her mouth to question Crusoe. However, as soon as she opened her mouth, she realized that her facial nerves were completely numb and she could not make any sound. When she wanted to stand up, she realized that every part of her body seemed to have been disconnected and could no longer be controlled by her will. The madwoman's heart was beating wildly. She took advantage of the fact that she had lost all her strength to turn her face, and only then could she see Crusoe. At this moment, Crusoe was standing at the edge of the witchcraft formation. He had a strange smile on his face as he looked at her coldly. His once scarlet eyes had now turned green. As Crusoe opened his mouth slightly, a strange insect head peeked out from inside. Its sinister mouthparts and numerous compound eyes made one's hair stand on end. Perhaps the time was ripe. The scorpion's sharp limbs exerted force, and it leaped out of Cruiser's mouth. Then, it quickly crawled on the floor, stepping on the squirming blood snakes, and crawled to Madwoman's feet. The wizard ring that restricted the numerous blood snakes outside was completely ineffective against this scorpion. It quickly moved its body and crawled along the madwoman's sturdy body all the way to her mouth. The madwoman desperately wanted to clench her teeth, but unfortunately, her numb senses made it impossible for her to do so. The scorpion Pride opened a small slit in her mouth and immediately crawled in without hesitation. The enraged mad woman instantly understood everything. Demonic insect in tech. He was the one behind all this. The flames of rage burned her body and mind, and her powerful willpower expelled the blood energy in her body bit by bit. Unfortunately, just as she was about to successfully regain control of her body violently trembled like a sieve and only calmed down after a long time. The mad woman calmly stood up. When she suddenly opened her eyes, there was a faint green color in the depths of her pupils. And when the mad woman and eagle-eye Crusader faced each other, their mouths were opened, revealing a sinister and frighteningly ugly insect head. At the same time, in many dark corners of the entire swamp tower, some hideous and frighteningly ugly scorpions were quietly lurking. They were either hiding under the bedboards of the acolytes' residences or hiding in the darkest corners of the rooms, silently watching every acolyte's every move. If any acolyte fell into a deep sleep, they would silently crawl along the legs of the bed, along the soft bedding, and inch by inch approach the acolyte. Once they found an opportunity, they would quickly pounce, using the fastest speed possible to dive into the opponent's mouth. Many acolytes' residences were filled with frightened, hoarse cries and sounds of struggling and retching, but it was of no use. Their throats swelled up high, and a small lump quickly burrowed inside. In just a short while, these angry and struggling acolytes would once again calm down, lie back on their beds, and sleep peacefully. And inside their bodies, an indistinct insect head was happily waving its antennae. Within the evil insect in Titch's bloody and stinky nest. Titch was still wrapped in that thick black robe, and his hood was lowered as he sat upright in the middle of the secret chamber. His wriggling body did not have the slightest trace of vitality. As long as Master Anderson did not give him any orders, he would always maintain this posture, mechanically eating, resting, reproducing, and catalyzing. All of the scorpions were born from his division. Inside his stomach, which was as big as a pregnant woman's, countless young scorpions constantly divided and multiplied, then gathered together to kill and devour each other. Only those scorpions that were strong enough could devour a sufficient number of their companions and crawl out of Titch's body, merging into the densely packed insect tide in the secret chamber. And in a corner of the secret chamber, a group of scorpions clustered together to form a new insect tide. The two insect tides were clearly separated from each other and would never mix together. And at the core of the new insect tide, the strange insect that carried Titch's main consciousness was constantly hissing, maintaining a secret mental connection with the splits scattered throughout the swamp tower. In its perception, the acolytes in various parts of the tower were falling one after another. This also allowed its mental antennae to unscrupulously extend to every remote corner. However, its army of splits were not unscrupulous, and every single individual would invade. Instead, they locked their targets on the acolytes with basic combat power. As for the human slaves at the bottom, it did not even bother to waste its power on them. Moreover, this invasion that spread to the entire tower also deliberately avoided a few specific targets and did not capture all the acolytes in one go. Grim, Mary, Alice, and the Goblin Cabbie. These four special individuals mixed in with a group of insect people and did not notice the changes in the outside world. And in Titch's main consciousness, which was secretly controlling everything, was silently accumulating power. Once that terrifying moment arrived, these individuals whose souls were controlled by him would all become his valiant warriors who did not fear death. Although he had already formed a strategic alliance with Grimm, besides working together, he still wanted to preserve some final chips that could be used to turn the tables. The Goblin Cabbie laid down in his goblin shop, feeling bored. These days were rather strange. Everyone in the tower seemed to be acting strangely. The few beginner acolytes who usually hung around the goblin shop were also nowhere to be seen. The swamp tower that had just been bustling for a few days had once again become deserted. Those acolytes seemed to have fallen into hibernation, staying in their own residences and rarely going out. Occasionally, they would bump into one or two on the same floor, but they would pass by expressionlessly, not even bothering to greet them. After suffering in such an atmosphere for a few days, Cabby also became lazy. He simply closed the shop and ran back to his residence to practice the camouflage spell and partial transformation spell hard. For some reason, a few days ago, his master had secretly given him a mission. If he wanted to achieve it, he would have to put in a lot of effort. After returning to his residence and activating all the magical defenses, Cabby carefully took out his magic wand and cast a camouflage spell on himself. Under the control of the witchcraft power, his body began to slowly change. His ugly and short body stretched a little, becoming similar to the target. His green skin also gradually became fair and tender, as though it could be broken by the wind. More importantly, his wrinkled and ugly face twisted and squirmed, faintly revealing the appearance of a cute little girl. After examining himself in front of the glass mirror, Cabby shook his head in dissatisfaction. He used his slender and fair little hand to hold the magic wand and continuously tapped and waved it on his body. Every time he touched it, a small partial transformation spell would make part of his body more and more similar to the image in his mind. Chapter 151. The magic swamp was still damp and dark every day, just like a pool of stagnant water filled with a foul stench. However, under the muddy and dirty water, there was a terrifying undercurrent surging. The prospective apprentices who were trapped on the first floor day and night were all full of envy towards those official apprentices who walked in front of them with their heads held high. However, they didn't know that a deadly storm that could destroy everything was coming towards them. In this storm, those who were not prepared enough would not be able to escape. In such a harsh environment, they held on for another 10 days. Finally, the terrifying day had arrived. It was a gloomy and cold morning. Most of the apprentices were still immersed in their sweet dreams, but that scary wizard Anderson had just completed the construction and modification of the mysterious wizard circle. As soon as Wizard Anderson came out of that special sealed alternate dimension, he quickly inserted his power of the will into the control core of the high tower. He had a panoramic view of the entire tower. These days, he had been busy in the alternate dimension, so he didn't have a complete understanding of the outside world. However, with his highest authority as a wizard stationed in the tower, nothing in this high tower could hide from his senses and prying. Perhaps they were vaguely reacting to his cold power of the will prying. Those few potential wizards of the will began to become active one after another, as if they had all woken up from their dreams. Since the ones who should be here are all here, there's no time like the present. Let's carry out the plan today. The skinny wizard Anderson was wearing a pointy hat and a gray wizard robe. He silently stood in the control hall of the high tower. His hands kept moving in the air, forming dazzling spell runes one after another. As soon as these spell runes appeared, they would disappear in an instant. Then, the high tower would slightly tremble. Under Wizard Anderson's control, the entire magic swamp was tightly covered by a thick mist. Even a few eye-catching entrances were hidden. As the tower slightly trembled, the body of the tower was also lit up. When the raging elemental energy flowed through the green glow stone that was used to build the high tower, it emitted a cold and desolate magic glow. The dead souls and vengeful spirits that were usually hidden in the depths of the swamp swarmed out and began to circle around the high tower, continuously letting out soul-stirring, ghostly screams. The terrifying magical creatures that had signed a witchcraft contract with the swamp tower that were entrenched in various parts of the magic swamp became restless and active. They left their nests one after another and gathered around the tower, vigilant of any outsiders approaching. Layers of magic light surrounded the high tower. Countless witchcraft traps and magic gears had been activated. All the secret magic doors and secret passages that could enter and exit the high tower had been sealed. Even the many narrow windows on the high tower were blocked by countless transparent air barriers. Almost at the same time, All the tower's apprentices were locked in place, unable to move at all. Almost at the same time, all the tower apprentices were locked in place and could no longer move. Following his command, the demonic worm in Titch, who had been sitting in the secret chamber like a dead man, suddenly raised his head. His eyes lit up with blazing and bright soul flames. Following his command, the doors of the apprentices' residences that were protected by countless witchcraft barriers opened. The scorpions swarmed in like a tide and quickly wrapped around the apprentices. With the help of Intix's many scorpions, all the tower apprentices were gathered and transported to the 5th floor, the higher floor of the wizard's pagoda that they had never set foot in before. In the bright and spacious magic hall on the 5th floor, the scorpions swarmed in and out, transporting all the tower apprentices one after another. Grimm and the other 2 prospective wizard apprentices were at the forefront. They were tightly bound by translucent air, shackles like mummies, their eyes closed and unconscious. Grimm and the other 2 sorcerer apprentices were at the forefront. They were tightly bound by the translucent air shackles like mummies, their eyes closed, and they were unconscious. Wizard Anderson only floated into the hall after everyone was in place. He looked down at the floor full of unconscious tower apprentices and smiled coldly. When everyone was in position, Wizard Anderson floated into the hall. He lowered his head to look at all the unconscious tower's acolytes, and a cold smile emerged on his face. Stop pretending to be asleep. Do you think I can't sense your restless mind wave? In front of Magus, all your tricks are useless. After hearing Anderson's words, the 3 prospective wizards at the forefront opened their eyes at the same time. Honorable Mr. Anderson, what are you trying to do? You can't be thinking of killing all the tower apprentices here, right? How are you going to explain this to the Cerubo family? Grimm struggled a few times, but he could not break the shackles on his body. He angrily asked Anderson, who was floating in the air, Family? When I use your blood, flesh, and souls to break the shackles, I will be a great level 2 wizard. By then, the Cerubo family will be trying to curry favor with me. Why would they blame me for a group of apprentices like you? What? You really want to kill us all? Anderson couldn't be bothered to listen to the last cry of a dying lamb. He pointed with one hand, and a silent spell landed on Grimm, instantly silencing him. Mary and Alice struggled as hard as they could, but they could not break the shackles on their body. Wizard Anderson gently pointed with his finger, and Grimm's storage belt flew into the air and landed in his hand. He closed his eyes and examined it. After a while, a look of joy appeared on his face. He flipped his hand, and a crystal-clear magic puppet crystal core with strong elemental waves appeared in his hand. Elemental puppets like this were rare even in the hands of an official wizard. If he could erase Grimm's will mark on it, maybe he could get himself a free servant. After making a few gestures, Anderson sealed this wizard crystal core with a simple seal and put it in his pocket with a smile on his face. After looking around again and making sure he did not miss anything, Wizard Anderson raised his arms up high. Following a strong dimensional wave, the entire hall was wrapped in a gentle white light. When the white light slowly faded, everyone was no longer on the 5th floor of the Swamp Tower. Instead, they were in an unknown magic room. The magic room was not small. It was about the size of 3 football fields. In the middle of the room, there was a strange triangular altar. The altar was not big, but it was divided into 3 levels. Each level was about 2 meters tall, and there were 10 steps connecting them. On the walls of every level of the altar, there were all kinds of lifelike human faces. Some were in pain, some were crying, and some were sad. Their expressions were all different, but they were all very lifelike. It was as if they were made of living people. It was very chilling. Anderson flew up to the top of the altar and stood there steadily. As an obscure and profound incantation resounded in the world, the secret magic room was completely sealed with a rumbling sound, cutting off all contact with the outside world. This was also Anderson's insurance. In order to prevent the outside world from interfering, he temporarily sealed this space. Before he successfully performed the blood sacrifice, no one would be able to escape from here. Perhaps at this time tomorrow, the one who would walk out of this space with his head held high would be a reborn Anderson, a rank 2 magus. At that time, all those who had looked down on him would have to bow their heads under his dazzling radiance. They would be filled with fear and respect. The entire scattered tower forest would be celebrating the birth of a new rank 2 magus. With boundless expectations for the future, Anderson bent down and scanned the acolytes who were lying on the ground. He waved his hand and released the wind chains on Mary. The moment she regained her freedom, Mary's figure was as fast as lightning. Almost instantly, she appeared in front of Anderson. Her blood-red claws slashed at his throat at a speed that was hard to see with the naked eye. If not for that strange transparent barrier, Mary might have had a chance to hurt Anderson. Unfortunately, facing a magus who had advanced for more than 300 years, no matter how fast Mary's sneak attack was, it was not as fast as Anderson's. Asterisk swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Asterisk following that, countless claw marks appeared on the transparent barrier. Mary clenched her teeth and attacked with all her might, but she still could not break through that thin barrier. With the support of the Swamp Tower, a steady stream of pure magic energy passed through space and entered the transparent barrier outside of Anderson's body. Unless Mary's attack was strong enough to break this barrier in one hit, she would not be able to exhaust the wind elemental energy on the barrier. My beautiful and elegant personal servant, do not restrain your wild and unrestrained nature. Give up your meaningless resistance. From now on, continue to crawl under the feet of your great master Anderson. Following Wizard Anderson's murmur on the altar, Mary, who was in the middle of a crazy attack, suddenly trembled. Her scarlet eyes instantly turned pale. She also stopped what she was doing subconsciously. That's right. Go, go. Under the altar are the countless lambs I prepared for you. Go taste their blood and let the boiling blood warm your cold body again. Mary's pretty face showed a hint of pain and struggle. Unfortunately, her will was not even worth mentioning under the restriction of Wizard Anderson's spell. She didn't even need to bend her fingers. Her main body's consciousness was overturned by the surging vampire instinct. Mary's throat made a soft sound. She jumped down the altar and fiercely laid on the body of the acolyte closest to her. She angrily revealed her sharp vampire fangs and instantly pierced through the acolyte's carotid artery. The acolyte woke up from his deep sleep and cried loudly. Unfortunately, his cries for help and struggles were of no use. After a while, his breathing gradually became softer. Chapter 152. Inside Goblin KB's room. In the corner of the room, a large group of black beetles was wriggling around. Their huge numbers formed the outline of a human figure. After the tower fell silent, the black swarm suddenly exploded with a bang, and Alice came out of it in a sorry state. She casually brushed off the remaining beetles on her shoulder, lapel, and long hair. She pinched her nose and stomped a few of them to death with a look of disgust. After that, she closed her eyes and sensed the situation inside the tower. At this moment, the inside of the tower was empty. She could no longer sense any signs of life. All the wizard apprentices on the second floor and above had disappeared without a trace. Only the young wizard apprentices on the first floor were quietly lying on their wooden beds. They were no longer breathing. It was obvious that Wizard Anderson had cut off all means of retreat. He did not want to leave any way out for himself. If he could not use the blood sacrifice ceremony to successfully become a rank 2 wizard by this time tomorrow, he would not be able to escape the punishment of the Cerubo family. According to the agreement of the Scattered Tower Forest Wizard Association, those who relied on blood sacrifice to increase their strength would be severely punished. If he could successfully become a rank 2 wizard and was willing to continue serving the family, then the Cerubo family would be more than happy to help him hide the situation in the magic swamp. They could casually come up with a reason like a monster riot or a leaked witchcraft experiment, and everything that happened here would be wiped clean. Therefore, although Wizard Anderson was full of confidence and looked like he had everything under control, If he failed to level up, the only ending that awaited him would be to sign a life contract with the Cerubo family and give up all his rights as a wizard. He would have to work hard for the Cerubo family for the rest of his life. As for killing him, no wizard family would waste such precious resources. Even if he was alone, Alice floated in the empty corridor. Behind her were black beetles that were as dense as the tide. Their destination was the control hall on the 5th floor of the Swamp Tower. Even though Wizard Anderson had already teleported all the apprentices to that mysterious secret magic room, this uncontrolled tower was still following the mechanism he had set up. While it was sealing itself, it was still continuously sending powerful elemental energy to that secret place. If they didn't find a way to cut off the connection between Wizard Anderson and this tower, Grimm's faction would have to face a powerful wizard with endless elemental energy. Against such an opponent, even if they were all tied up together, they would not be able to withstand a single attack from the enemy. Passing through the secluded corridor and climbing up the narrow and steep stone stairs, Alice soon arrived at the junction between the 4th and 5th floors. There was a translucent energy membrane in front of them, and any movement that touched it would trigger the tower's defense mechanism to counterattack. Although they had lost the control of the sorcerer station in the tower, once the hidden strength of a sorcerer tower was revealed, it was still not something that ordinary sorcerer apprentices could contend with. Alice gritted her teeth and plunged into the energy film without looking back. Behind her, the swarm of black beetles also swarmed in, filling up the entire spiral stone stairs in an instant. As soon as Alice stepped into the corridor of the 5th floor, the usually empty corridor suddenly became gloomy and scary. The stone walls on both sides suddenly turned into a sticky and tough membrane, constantly bulging outwards one after another, as if there were countless monsters struggling to break out of it. The stone walls that had become as thin as cicada wings began to show the heads of terrifying monsters one after another. They struggled while roaring at Alice with all their might. On the other side of the corridor, 2 crisp-popping sounds could be heard. On both sides, a monster had broken free from the stone walls, and its juices splashed onto the cold gray floor. The appearance of these 2 monsters was like a signal. In the next few seconds, popping sounds could be heard, and one monster after another broke free from the stone walls. In an instant, they had filled up the corridor in front of them. Wizard beasts. They were all wizard beasts. These were all terrifying beasts that the wizard station in the tower had modified using witchcraft. Each of them had the strength of an advanced wizard apprentice, and there were many of them. Even if Alice was a prospective sorcerer, she would still be killed by them if they swarmed her at the same time. Alice's face was pale, but she did not dare to hesitate. She screamed and rushed forward. Her side was indeed having a hard time, but Grimm's side was probably 10 times, no, 100 times worse. Instead of facing the terrifying Wizard Anderson who had revealed all his fangs and claws, Alice would rather fight with the wizard beasts that were 100 times stronger than her here. 2 thick dimensional blades opened up a path, and in an instant, they shot into the dense group of wizard beasts. Along the way, their skin and flesh were lacerated, mucus splattered everywhere. After all, wizard beasts were mutated beasts that had been modified by witchcraft. Although their bodies had been modified to be impenetrable by blades and swords, in the face of the all-conquering and exceptionally sharp space slash, they could only howl in pain as their limbs were severed and their heads were separated from their bodies. However, there were just too many wizard beasts. There were still many wizard beasts that rushed in front of Alice, madly punching and biting the thin dimensional barrier. Alice endured the discomfort of seeing the ugly, wrinkled, and mucus-covered bodies of the wizard beasts at such a close distance. She clenched her teeth and quickly launched one-dimensional blade after another. All the flesh and blood were just a pile of rotten meat in front of Alice's terrifying dimensional cutting spell. It was like a hot knife cutting through a piece of solidified butter. Wherever it passed, it would be cut in half silently. Alice floated in the air, and all the wizard beasts in front of her were like thrown into a meat grinder. They were broken into pieces, and blood and flesh splattered everywhere. All kinds of broken body parts flew past her eyes. There was even half a wizard bee's head that suddenly flew over, stuck to the dimensional barrier in front of her, and slowly slid down to the ground. The ground under her feet had completely turned into a slaughterhouse of flesh and blood. Countless broken corpses were lying on the ground, and every one of them had died a miserable death. Purple and green blood splattered all over the entire corridor, and an unknown liquid kept dripping down. Alice's cute little face was tense, and her eyes were filled with an extremely sharp, killing intent. At this terrifying juncture of life and death, she no longer pretended to be cute and harmless, and completely revealed her true black-bellied and ruthless face. It took Alice a full 15 minutes to walk through the short corridor that was less than 30 meters long. Behind her was a slaughterhouse that no one was willing to take a second look at. After she used the dimensional ripples to shake off the colorful blood and intestines stuck to the dimensional barrier, as well as the many flesh and blood residues that could not be identified, another long corridor appeared in front of her. There were many colorful oil paintings hanging on both sides of the corridor. They were either beautiful sceneries or exquisite portraits of people. Unfortunately, without exception, the protagonist of the painting was missing in all of them. In the corridor, groups of hazy and illusory specters and vengeful spirits, as well as distorted and deformed magical plants, were wandering and climbing aimlessly. Without a doubt, Alice's appearance attracted their attention. All the spirits and magical creatures stopped in their tracks and turned their heads to look at Alice. In the dim light, balls of blood-red soul fire and ghostly green light lit up one after another. Alice's face instantly turned livid. These bastards all had the strength of a quasi-wizard. Grim, I hate you. Alice's angry screams reverberated in the quiet corridor, lingering in the air with hatred. Inside the secret space, Wizard Anderson, who was sitting on top of the scary altar, closed his eyes and sensed for a moment. He was slightly surprised. I didn't expect you to leave a helper outside. Since Alice is outside, this one must be fake. As Anderson pointed with his finger, a black light entered the body of Alice, who was lying obediently on the ground. After a moment of wriggling, the ugly and short green body of Goblin Cappy appeared in front of him. Not bad at all. You've planned it very well. Anderson's face darkened, but he did not panic at all. Instead, he showed a regretful expression. You must have made preparations in advance to be able to set up an ambush outside. And the only way you could obtain this information is... As soon as Anderson stopped talking, countless wind chains suddenly extended from the void around the demonic worm in Titch, who was standing silently at the edge of the altar, and tightly bound him up. But even though Anderson's action showed great hostility, the demonic insect in Tech did not resist and obeyed Anderson's orders as always. It's not him. Anderson consecutively sent a few runes into the demonic insect in Tech's body, but he still did not find anything suspicious. The blood contract between the souls was still as stable as before, without any signs of being touched. Anderson gave up after thinking hard, but to no avail. One less quasi-wizard. So be it. Actually, the three of you are enough for me to break through the threshold of a rank 2 wizard. But I'm curious. Since you could think of arranging people outside, how do you plan to fight against me? You can't possibly think that you can fight against me with just a few quasi-wizards, right? If that's the case, I really have to feel sorry for your childishness. Wizard Anderson coldly stared at Grim. Even though he was tied to the floor by the wind chains, the cold smile on Grim's face did not diminish. Even if I become a quasi-wizard, I still can't get rid of my status as a wizard acolyte. I'm indeed not qualified to fight against you. But how many magi do you want? Chapter 153. Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you right now? Anderson roared. Grim laughed. You're welcome to do so. I've already given up on resisting, so you can kill me if you want. But how will you carry out your plan to become a rank 2 magus? You've brought so many acolytes here, and I'm afraid that you'll only be able to break through if you turn us into magi. If you're afraid that we'll resist, You can just kill us now and beg the emissary of the Salubo family tomorrow. You might still be able to be Magus Anderson, but your dream is destined to be shattered. Since you've already told me your plan, do you really think that I'll let you ruin it? So what if you understand? You must turn us into magi today, and then devour us. This is the path that you've chosen for yourself, and it's a fate that we can't escape from. At this point, you can't change your plans so easily, and we can only fight for our lives. But you shouldn't be so straightforward and honest. Do you have any other plans? Huh? What kind of plans can I have? There are only 3 companions here today. You were really careless when you were dealing with that puppet subordinate. You actually allowed his main consciousness to remain. It doesn't seem like he came in with us, so it seems like he's using me as cannon fodder. Since that's the case, why should I cover up for him? It's really him. Humph. I didn't expect this half-insect body to have some tricks up its sleeve to actually be able to escape the restrictions of the blood contract. Other than that, is there anything else? Of course there is. My only helper, Mary, has now become a bargaining chip in your hands. If that's the case, I'm the only one who can risk my life against you today. I hope that you'll be careful. After saying this, Grimm closed his eyes and ignored Anderson. Anderson silently stared at Grimm, who had a determined expression on his face and was secretly surprised. He really did not expect that a nobody who had endured under him for 7 years would have such an arrogant and flamboyant personality. He actually dared to challenge him in public. If it was a month ago, Anderson would definitely have retaliated with even more cruel and terrifying methods if Grimm dared to be so arrogant and despotic. He would use the terrifying truth to teach this brat a lesson. In this world, Magi were the rulers of everything. Unfortunately, he spent most of his time modifying the blood altar. 3 quasi-sorcerers, 3 crucial points of the blood sacrifice. None of them could be missing. Only when everything went according to his will could he obtain the perfect ending that he had been looking forward to for a long time. As for the foreign prospective wizard, Alice, Anderson was not sure of her origin, so he only arranged for her to be his substitute sacrifice. But now, the puppet's remnant consciousness had wantonly spread, allowing these sacrifices to be prepared in advance. Alice did not enter the secret space, which also indicated that the sacrifice of the 3 magi in front of him must not be missing. Otherwise, the blood sacrifice ceremony would not be able to start. Once the blood sacrifice ceremony began, the first stage would be to extract the lives, souls, and flesh of many sorcerer apprentices and use them to water the 3 chosen quasi-sorcerers. With the help of this strange and twisted life force, they all had a 70% to 80% chance of becoming wizards. Once they became wizards, the second stage of the blood sacrifice ceremony would begin. At that time, the powerful flesh and soul force of the 3 newly advanced wizards would become his food, helping him break through the shackles of a grade 2 wizard. Grimm had made it clear that his counterattack would come after the first stage of the blood sacrifice ceremony ended and the second stage began. This was undoubtedly the best time to strike back, if he had the ability to. Facing a fearless young quasi-sorcerer, Anderson smiled sinisterly and waved his hand in the air. As a black rune appeared and disappeared, a shadow under Grimm's body suddenly came to life. The shadow was not big, and it was as thin as a piece of parchment, but it was extremely agile. However, it was extremely agile. Like a paper man, it climbed to Grimm's chest, pulled out a dagger that looked like a piece of paper, and stabbed it into Grimm's chest. Grimm groaned in pain, and blood splattered all over the paper doll's body. Like a real life, the paper doll stretched out its thin little hand and dipped it in Grimm's golden blood, smearing it evenly on its body. After everything was done, the paper doll's body suddenly emitted the same soul force as Grimm's. Immediately, it crawled towards Grimm's mouth with a sinister smile, pried open his teeth, and disappeared into the depths of his throat. Although he had already guessed what Wizard Anderson would do, Grimm still had goosebumps all over his body when he saw such a strange scene. On the meat on the chopping block. Even though he knew that Wizard Anderson would use some method to control his mind, Grimm still couldn't help but be shocked by the wizard's strange methods. Before Grimm could finish his thought, his body suddenly began to struggle violently, allowing the shackles of wind to tear open his flesh. All of Grimm's muscles tensed up. His veins that were as thick as earthworms also popped up, showing the intense battle of consciousness in his body. Unfortunately, with his acolyte-level spiritual force, he was still unable to fight against an experienced wizard. In less than 5 seconds, his body suddenly fell back down. His throat kept gurgling, but he couldn't say a single word. After a while, Grimm finally calmed down and laid on the ground motionlessly. If it wasn't for the slight rise and fall of his chest, Grimm would have looked like he was dead. TSK, TSK, TSK. Now that your consciousness and soul are under my control, what right do you have to resist me? Another pitiful worm who only knows how scary wizards are based on simple books and scattered legends. If you had a little understanding of the power and methods of a wizard, you wouldn't be so arrogant in front of a wizard. The world of wizards is not something you weaklings can imagine. Kakik. Controlling Grimm's consciousness was not the end. Anderson waved his hand, and all of Grimm's elemental magic equipment and strange items left his body and flew towards the altar like a long snake. However, among the magic equipment, there was one that caught Anderson's attention. It was a magic book that Grimm had tied to his waist with a silver chain. Under Anderson's control, it was less than 10 meters away from Grimm's body when it flashed and reappeared at Grimm's waist. Soul equipment? This time, even Anderson couldn't help but be curious about Grimm. From the characteristics of this book, it should be a soul equipment recorded in the ancient books. It was a magic equipment that was tied to the owner's soul. This kind of soul equipment was much more powerful than normal magic equipment. However, the growth of every soul equipment required extremely harsh external conditions. Without a large amount of resources and painstaking efforts, soul equipment would not be able to display its power and would be no different from normal magic equipment. At most, it would have some special methods. These acolyte-level methods would be no more terrifying than a mosquito bite against a magus. Facing such a rare soul equipment, Anderson did not have the time to investigate its mysteries. He could only use a simple energy seal and let it continue hanging on Grimm's waist. There was no other way. Every soul equipment was like this. Before the host was completely killed, there was no way to separate it from the host. After dealing with Grimm, Wizard Anderson finally turned his attention to Mary. At this moment, Mary had already crazily sucked the blood of 4 acolytes. Her lower abdomen was slightly swollen, her eyes were scarlet red, and her fangs were all over her face. Anderson called out softly, "Come here." Hearing this, Mary's body trembled, and a painful expression appeared on her face. On one hand, a hidden consciousness imprint in the depths of her soul ordered her to obey, but on the other hand, the violent and restless vampire instincts were subconsciously resisting this order. Seeing that the effect of the consciousness imprint was not as good as before, Anderson's face turned gloomy. In order not to hinder the evolution of a vampire's talent, Anderson did not erase Mary's instincts. Although this would allow Mary to quickly grow into an offering that satisfied him, it also meant that after becoming a quasi-wizard, she would no longer be completely under his control. However, as Anderson strengthened the strength of his consciousness, Mary finally walked in front of him unwillingly. Anderson slashed through the air, and a wound immediately appeared on Mary's neck. A strong arrow of blood immediately spurted out. Before the blood could even fall to the ground, Anderson had already cast a spell to collect it. After being attacked, Mary immediately went berserk. She took a few steps back and kept baring her fangs at Anderson, but she still did not dare to pounce on him. Anderson was in a bad mood. Seeing this, he became even more furious. He swept Mary into the air with a wind vortex. When she once again screamed and struggled free from the whirlwind filled with wind blades, the surface of her body looked as if she had been rolled in a blender. There were large and small wounds all over her body, and one could even see her white bones in a few places. The injured Mary immediately let out a shrill cry and quickly ran away like a wounded puppy. She crawled on the ground and gently licked her wounds. Suck him to heal his injuries. Anderson used his long staff to pick up an acolyte and threw it to Mary. He coldly warned her, "This is a warning for you. Remember next time, I'm your master. If you dare to disrespect me again, I'll drain all the blood in your body next time." The acolyte who was sent flying by Anderson was the new head acolyte, Alan. However, at this moment, he could only helplessly watch as his body flew towards that terrifying demon. Mary grabbed Alan in a flash, then immediately crouched down on his neck and bit down. Although Alan's mind was clear, his body was not under his control at all. He only felt two cold, sharp fangs silently piercing into his blood vessels. Then he felt a dizziness as if the sky and earth were spinning. In a hazy, chaotic trance, he felt his eyes light up and suddenly appeared in a magic hall filled with people. All the acolytes and magi, familiar and unfamiliar, were lined up on both sides of the red carpet, smiling at him. The thunderous applause and cheers were deafening. As for him, he was wearing a luxurious sorcerer's robe and holding an exquisite sorcerer's staff in his hand. He nodded to the crowd with a smile on his face as he walked towards the dazzling high platform that was the center of attention. On top of the tall ceremonial platform, a beautiful woman in red was smiling sweetly at him. Who is she? That's right. She's the intimate lover that I swore to accompany for life. Thinking of this, Alan could not help but take 2 steps forward. He wanted to quickly walk up the platform and grab his lover's fair and delicate hand. However, he did not know why, but the red carpet under his feet seemed to be continuously extending. No matter how hard he ran and shouted, the distance between him and his beautiful lover's hand was getting further and further. Finally, the scene around him became more and more chaotic, and his consciousness became more and more blurred. Chapter 154. On top of the bloody altar, 3 blood-stained execution chairs were erected in a triangular formation. Grim, Intich, and Mary were currently sitting on them, looking lost as they waited for something. Below them, on the first and second level of the altar, were all the acolytes lying on the ground. There was a huge bloody hole on each of the corpses, and blood was gushing out of it. The runes on the altar had absorbed enough blood and began to light up one after another. A bloody mist gradually spread out, covering the altar with a layer of mysterious and evil colors. When all the evil runes on the altar were lit up, a faint murmur of souls began to echo in the field. After that, countless wraiths and vengeful spirits began to appear, and they circled around the altar. Their hazy, illusory bodies would sometimes transform into beautiful young girls, and at other times, they would transform into terrifying ghosts with withered appearances. Chirps and giggles could be heard continuously. Amidst this bizarre scene of angels and demons, the corpses of the acolytes on the altar quickly withered. Their flesh, blood, and souls seemed to be sucked away by a foreign object, and they quickly curled up and transformed into ghouls. The red light on the altar became more and more eye-catching. In a material plane where the laws of the plane were extremely strict, a blood sacrifice would cause a strong backlash from the plane's consciousness. This was especially true for a large-scale plane like the Sorcerer World, where the host of the blood sacrifice would face a terrifying backlash. This bloody altar, which Wizard Anderson had spent a lot of effort to build, could obviously split the backlash from the plane's consciousness into 3 ritual nodes. Thus, when the blood sacrifice ceremony was carried out, Grim, Intich, and Mary were firmly tied to the execution chairs, their bodies trembling like sifting chaff. This was not because they were afraid, but because an indescribably vast consciousness had locked onto them from afar, continuously transmitting its anger through the laws. Under the pressure of that vast consciousness, the 3 of them began to bleed from their mouths and noses, and red snakes of blood flowed down from the corners of their eyes and ears. However, the damage to their bodies could never compare to the damage to their souls. If it wasn't for the bloody altar absorbing the acolyte's life force to sustain their consumption, perhaps Grimm and the other two would have perished the moment they came into contact with the boundless consciousness. Even so, the repeated collisions between their individual wills and the plane's consciousness had caused their soul origins to be riddled with holes and become extremely fragile. Although these wounds on the soul could be repaired by the soul fragments transmitted from the altar, it was extremely easy for these outsiders to contaminate the source of one's soul. Moreover, the soul fragments absorbed by the bloody altar were tainted with the negative emotions of the apprentices before they died, such as anger, hatred, fear, and grief. Allowing so many negative emotions to flow into one's mind at once was undoubtedly an extremely terrifying thing for a normal soul. From this point, it could be seen that Wizard Anderson didn't care whether the three of them could become real wizards or not. Instead, he used the method of blood sacrifice to repeatedly stimulate the origin of their souls and the potential of their bodies, and overdraft their vitality and spiritual power. When their entire body and mind were brewed to the extreme, their power of the will would undergo a qualitative change from quantitative change to qualitative change. With a large amount of negative emotions as the core, they could condense their own core of consciousness. Therefore, many witchcraft books call the process of becoming a wizard the crystallization of the will of the will. Only when a prospective wizard had successfully, completely, and stably condensed his own core of consciousness could his advancement ceremony be considered a success. On the other hand, what Wizard Anderson had arranged for Grimm and the other two was an immature and unstable wizard promotion ceremony. Under the influence of the blood sacrifice, the three of them might be able to raise their body, mind, and spiritual power to the lowest threshold of becoming a wizard in a short period of time and condense their core of consciousness. However, once the blood sacrifice's power faded away, without a stable understanding of the law, their core of consciousness would collapse sooner or later, and it would bring irreversible damage to their souls. However, Wizard Anderson didn't care. What he wanted was that short period of qualitative change for the three of them. As long as he took advantage of the short period of time when the three of them became wizards and used them as sacrifices for the second blood sacrifice, he would only need to endure a little bit of backlash from the plane of consciousness, and he would be able to instantly devour the three newly condensed core of consciousness. At that time, he would have a 30% to 40% chance of breaking through the threshold that had been holding him back for many years, and he would become the most powerful rank 2 wizard in the Scattered Tower Forest. As soon as he thought about the beautiful future, Anderson's heart began to surge with excitement. However, the closer he got to this point, the more he couldn't relax or be tired. Therefore, he forced himself to calm down and carefully observe the changes of the three of them on the execution chair. The blood sacrifice ceremony had gradually entered the climax. The 3 sacrifices were also at the critical moment of condensing their core of consciousness. If that brat really had some special plan, this would be the best time for him to prepare for a counterattack. Therefore, Wizard Anderson used his powerful power of the will to closely monitor the changes of the three of them through different methods, and waited for the strange changes that could happen at any time. Just as he expected, when the blood sacrifice energy on the blood altar was at its most intense, the damn change really did happen. The change happened to Grimm. He was sitting on the execution chair, and his entire body had expanded a few times under the stimulation of the intense life, force, and soul breath. The sturdy muscles on the surface of his body were densely covered in cracks, and extremely intense heat was emitted from his body. He was obviously walking the path of elemental wizard, specializing in fire element. However, this advancement ceremony did not have any resources to strengthen his fire element talent. Therefore, if there was a backlash of advancement, he would probably be the one with the most tragic consequences among the 3. Perhaps it was because Grimm had sensed the tragic fate of his future. His body and soul were completely controlled by the paper man, and he began to tremble violently. An indescribably terrifying fire-type origin energy began to burn within his body, igniting his entire body, including his soul. Wizard Anderson's face immediately turned pale. Through his perception of the will, the paperman hiding in Grimm's soul kept screaming in fear. The order to ignite his body and soul was not given by the paperman. Could it be? This Grimm was the same as in Tick, and had a second consciousness hidden in the depths of his soul? No matter how hard Wizard Anderson thought, he could not understand the unique form of the chip. This chip was embedded in Grimm's genes, and it was like an auxiliary brain. The operation and thinking of this brain were all carried out through the way of bioelectricity, so it was very hard to be detected by the outside world. Even with Wizard Anderson's craftiness and meticulousness, he still focused more on the traces of witchcraft, elemental energy, and spiritual force waves. The existence of the AI chip, which was completely different from the rest, had managed to hide itself from his detection. Actually, Grimm and the chip had already done countless simulations of the possible changes and developments of the blood sacrifice ceremony. As long as Wizard Anderson did not lose his mind, he would definitely be able to control Grimm and the other two with spells before the blood sacrifice ceremony began. This was simply a matter of course. That was why Grimm did not hide anything from Anderson at the start and directly revealed his trump card. In any case, no matter what he said or did, the other party would still do the same thing. Grimm decided not to hide it and directly revealed his trump card, which made Anderson suspicious. In reality, Grimm's body and soul could not withstand the invasion of the paperman, and he was controlled by it using a special method. Fortunately, Grimm and the AI chip had come up with hundreds and thousands of countermeasures to deal with different situations. The AI chip only needed to choose the most suitable countermeasure when Grimm lost his consciousness, and at the most crucial moment of the blood sacrifice ceremony. After all, in terms of body control, the paperman could never compare to the AI chip, which was a part of Grimm's body. The AI chip's plan was to burn itself. The AI chip had no idea what the paperman was. However, it only needed to know that it could not be a fire elemental. It completely burned itself from body and mind to flesh and even to the soul. Everything that could be burned was burning. Grimm's body trembled violently as he sat on the execution chair. He let out a long cry of pain towards the sky, and from his nostrils came a terrifying stream of flames that left one speechless. Amidst the terrifying flames, the paper figure struggled and roared in pain. However, it was soon ignited, incinerated, and turned into ashes that dissipated into thin air. Grimm broke free from the control of his soul and woke up from the chaos. The moment he woke up, Grimm frowned in pain. From his body to his soul, the two opposing consciousnesses made him think that he was suffering from schizophrenia. Otherwise, why would he have such conflicting consciousnesses at the same time? A feeling from his body to his soul kept telling him how good his current situation was. Endless life force, soul fragments filled with profound consciousness and comprehension. All of these things kept surging into his body and mind, making him stronger and stronger. He had the illusion that he could continue to grow stronger like this forever. However, there was another feeling that was exactly the opposite. A strong sense of danger enveloped his body and mind, causing his soul to turn dim. He had never felt so weak and insignificant, like a balloon that had been blown to its limit. Perhaps in the next second, with a bang, he would disappear into thin air. These two feelings were so clear and intuitive, and they had etched deeply into the depths of Grimm's soul, making him believe it without a doubt. Was he strong or weak? Was he about to reach the peak of his life, or was he hovering at the edge of death? Chapter 155. However, Grimm might be confused, but the AI chip would not. The AI chip was monitoring all the data in Grimm's body. It could even predict what would happen next based on the curves of his body's functions. If he continued to receive the unfiltered strange energy from the bloody altar, he might be able to condense an unknown core of consciousness. However, once the strange energy disappeared, he would fall miserably. Even if his core of consciousness was broken, his soul would not be able to escape the terrifying backlash of failing to advance. It was time to fight back. He could not wait until his core of consciousness was formed. Otherwise, he would lose the chance to condense a core of consciousness with his innate fire elemental ability. Grimm suddenly began to struggle on the execution chair. However, his limbs were tied to the chair with a special rope, and there was even a hemispherical iron hat on his head. Every movement he made would cause a strong rebound from the execution chair. Strange runes appeared on the black rope, burning his skin and flesh. The rope was very tight, and it looked like it was going to penetrate into his flesh. The iron hat on his head even had 7 or 8 burning red spikes piercing into his skull, releasing a strange wave that could disturb a person's normal thinking. The pain and the disturbance of thinking were enough to stop Grimm from doing what he wanted to do next. Grimm's vitality was 13 points, which was enough for him to endure most physical pain. Even so, it was still difficult for him to resist the special torture tool that Wizard Anderson had prepared for them. It had to be said that Anderson had put in a lot of effort to control the 3 of them. The rope was made from the skin of the East Coast Black Flood Dragon, which was enough to resist any quasi-wizard spell attack. Also, none of the 3 of them specialized in strength, so it was impossible for them to break free from the execution chair with just their physical strength. Also, with the influence of the gnome's brainwashing hat, even if the 3 of them really became wizards, they would not have the chance to absorb the elemental energy from the outside world to recover themselves. They were just 3 pieces of meat with the identity of a wizard, but they did not have the strength of a wizard. This was a small dimension controlled by Anderson, so he had full control over this dimension. Without his permission, the 3 of them would not even be able to absorb a single bit of elemental energy. 3 offerings that only had the strength of a quasi-wizard. This was the feast that Wizard Anderson had prepared for himself. The strange energy from the altar continued to penetrate Grimm's body through the execution chair, pushing him deeper into the abyss. Even in such a life and death situation, Grimm was still as calm as ever. His mind was even clearer than usual. "Alice, are you done or not? If you continue to delay, it will be difficult for me to escape death, and I'm afraid you'll be buried with me. Quick, all right, give me another 7 minutes. These, damn, tower protectors are really hard to kill." Alice's consciousness was fluctuating from the depth of her soul. Apparently, she was in the middle of a fierce battle. "Remember, you only have half an hour. Now, give me what I need first. Damn it, this is killing me. Must you ask for something at this time? Bastard. Ouch." Alice hurriedly cursed and let out a shrill scream. It was obvious that she had used her most terrifying skill, Space Shatter. After clearing all the enemies around her, Alice finally had the time to pass Grimm the things he needed. Feeling a slight vibration in his palms, Grimm sat upright on the execution chair. He flipped both of his hands, and a miniature spatial spell formation appeared in each of his palms, creating circles of spatial ripples. Once the spatial ripples were concentrated to a certain degree, a small spatial tunnel was torn open. Asterisk bada. Asterisk with a light sound. 2 items appeared in Grimm's hands through the short-distance teleportation spell formation. In the past month, Alice had repeatedly tried various methods to teleport the items to Grimm, but they were all blocked by elemental barriers and spatial barriers. She couldn't enter. Being forced to the extreme, Alice's imagination had gone wild. She had actually come up with something as strange as a miniature spatial positioning spell formation. With her ideas and the AI chip doing it for her, the mysterious spell formation in Grimm's palms was completed. With the guidance and positioning of the spell formation, it was much easier for Alice to pass the items to Grimm. Many times, it was as easy as a short-distance teleportation. In Grimm's left hand was the crystal core of the Flame Lord's magic puppet, and in his right hand was the Flame Lord's scepter. Grimm had a premonition that all his equipment and items would be taken away by Anderson, so he had long ago left the 2 killing weapons that could help him turn the tables on Alice. He would pass them to her when necessary. Now that he had the magic puppet and the magic equipment, it was time to fight with Magus Anderson. The Flame Lord's scepter in his right hand gently waved, and a large flaming door immediately appeared behind Grimm. Through the hazy flaming door, one could vaguely see the terrifying world of fire elemental energy that was made up of pure flames. Endless fire elements gushed out from the flaming door, turning the space nearby into a sea of fire. At the same time, Grimm threw the magic puppet crystal core into the sea of fire. In the next second, an indomitable Lord of the Flames was born from the raging sea of flames. The first thing the Flame Lord did after it appeared was to wave its flaming magma hand and destroy the execution chair that Grimm was tied to. When Grimm moved his numb arm, the terrifying wounds on his body quickly began to close up and heal until they disappeared. Since he had the body of fire, any place with fire was his home ground, and he could even heal himself at the same time. Wizard Anderson floated in the air above the bloody altar and looked down at the boy who was standing proudly under him. The rage and hatred in his heart had reached its peak. Under the interference of the powerful flaming door, the operation of the bloody altar was greatly affected. The other two offerings on the altar began to wriggle as if they were about to wake up. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Wizard Anderson let out a series of curses and attacked Grimm without any hesitation. Tens of thousands of violent and ferocious wind blades whistled towards Grimm. Grimm didn't even need to make a move himself. The Flame Lord that occupied half of the space on the top of the altar took 2 steps forward and threw a flaming storm. The wind blades collided with the flaming storm in midair, and the surroundings were instantly dyed red. Countless violent flames and sharp and pure wind blades collided and intertwined in the air, and soon the difference in power and effect was revealed. The power of the flaming storm was too scattered, and it was much weaker than the wind blades. Therefore, under the countless howling wind blades, the fire elementals that had yet to unleash the full power of the flaming storm were smashed into pieces. After the flaming storm was destroyed, the remaining wind blades finally struck the body of the flame giant. The flame giant stood tall, and the magma shield on its body was a combination of the fierceness of the fire element and the toughness of the earth element. Therefore, although there were many cuts, the fire elemental essence inside was not damaged. Relying on the protection of the flame giant, Grimm roared loudly and successfully summoned the flame spirit. Unlike before, Grimm always used the flame spirit as cannon fodder on the battlefield. Today, Grimm was different. He stabbed his hand into the chest of the flame spirit and took out a special firestone with faint runes on it. Grimm roared towards the sky, opened his mouth, and swallowed the firestone in one gulp. It was like he had swallowed a small sun. From his mouth to his throat, then to his stomach, endless light and heat shot out from Grimm's body, almost turning him into a transparent, flaming man. As soon as such a strong fire elemental essence entered his stomach, the many magic runes on Grimm's body began to light up one by one under the power of the fire elemental essence. Grimm roared loudly, and a blinding light and heat shot out from his body. The elemental essence of his soul had finally ignited his body and soul. In the past, Grimm had bathed in elemental flames countless times, but those were flames formed when the fire elemental essence collided with his flaming body. But now, Grimm was ignited by the fire emitted from the depths of his soul. After knowing, playing with, and studying fire for so long, for the first time, Grimm touched the internal rules of the fire elemental particles. He had a faint connection with the law of fire in the plane's consciousness. This was the true source of Grimm's future on the path of a magus. Not enough. This is not enough. I need more. Grimm roared loudly, and finally used the magical ability that the magic rune suit gave him. Balrog, transformation. A man of fire that was purer and more powerful than the flame giant appeared. His 2-meter-tall body continued to expand under the infusion of a large amount of fire elemental energy. Soon, he grew to 3 meters. A thick pillar of fire shot out from the flame gate behind him, continuously pouring the fire elemental energy into his body. Because the fireman's absorption of fire energy was too intense and urgent, even the flaming gate couldn't meet his needs. The flames on the tall pillars and doors of the gate of flames gradually faded away, revealing the ancient stone body that was covered in dense runes. With the support of such a large amount of fire elemental energy, Grimm once again let out a terrifying roar that shook the entire space. All the fire elemental energy that he had absorbed was driven by his powerful willpower into his spiritual space, where it was repeatedly compressed and tempered, compressed and tempered again. This level of fire elemental energy was not something that his body of fire could control. Every time his spiritual space trembled and shrank, the powerful fire elemental energy that was compressed and tempered by his consciousness would bring him terrifying fire elemental energy. When the fire elemental energy was strong enough, even a low-level body of fire would not be able to resist it. Every time his consciousness compressed the fire elemental energy, it was no different from a normal person hugging a brazier that could bring him great damage. There was no sound of burning skin or flesh, only intense pain that penetrated deep into his soul. Grimm became numb from the intense pain, and most of the impurities and useless impurities in his consciousness were burned away by the terrifying fire elemental energy. The powerful fire elemental energy finally began to condense under the continuous compression of his consciousness. With the trace of fire elemental energy as the core, it crystallized into the core of his consciousness that was necessary to advance to become a magus. Chapter 156. Never before had Grimm felt so close to the world will. In the past, he had always found it difficult to distinguish the difference between a plane's consciousness and the world will. He always felt that they were talking about the same thing from different perspectives. But now that he had advanced to become a fire elemental wizard, he deeply understood the huge difference between the two. A plane was a carrier that carried the survival, reproduction, and growth of all living things. When a plane was just born, the plane's consciousness basically existed. At the end of the day, it was just the collective consciousness of the entire plane's life and matter, hazy and chaotic. Since the plane's consciousness at this moment only had simple instinctive reactions and had not formed a clear and intuitive self-will, it could only be called the plane's consciousness. It could be said that most of the planes in the multiverse only had a plane's consciousness. The world will was obviously more advanced and intelligent than the plane's consciousness. When the plane grew to a certain extent, the plane's consciousness would give birth to a world will that was similar to a human soul. Therefore, most planes' consciousness was like a baby learning how to speak. It would react to anything that was harmful to it, but the process was stupid and slow. The world will was a matured plane's consciousness that could already give birth to independent self-will from the chaotic collective consciousness. It could use weapons like the plane's laws to intervene and adjust the internal affairs of its body. There were a few rare large planes in the multiverse that were like this. There were even some more mature world wills that could use their preferences to influence and guide the individuals living under their protection. Those who did the right thing would be rewarded, and those who did the wrong thing would be punished. Using the power of the world's laws, it would guide them in the direction they wanted. In an entire multiverse, there was only one world that had a mature world will, and it was the lower realm filled with evil demons, the Abyss world. The sorcerer world that Grimm lived in was also a large plane that had a world will. The billions of living beings and trillions of matter in the plane had condensed into a plane's consciousness that had a part of its own will. Every flower, grass, person, and stone in the plane, regardless of whether they were high or low, whether they were strong or weak, they were all insignificant parts of this powerful world will. This world was obviously the same as the plane's consciousness that was born in most material planes. It always rejected the sacrifice of a large number of souls to another world's blood sacrifice. That was why the world will gave Grimm preferential treatment for his direct confrontation with the blood altar by using the power of the laws. Otherwise, with Grimm's current soul aptitude, it would be quite difficult for him to become a wizard. According to the AI, Chip's calculations, if not for the world going easy on him, Grimm's chances of advancing to a magus would have been less than 7%. As far as Grimm knew, sorcerers often referred to this as world feedback. They used the laws and followed the guidance of the world to gain personal experience and improve their skills. And this feedback was actually a part of the laws of the world. In other words, Grimm had used the power of the world feedback to complete the advancement ceremony. He had successfully become a wizard and was free from the shackles of the bloody altar. But when he stood up and looked around the enclosed alternate dimension, the battle was still in the worst condition. In less than a quarter of an hour, the Flame Lord had been completely defeated. It couldn't withstand Wizard Anderson's crazy bombardment. As for his other two companions, Mary was tied to the execution chair at the other corner of the altar. She was screaming in pain toward the sky, and it was obvious that she was in a bad situation. Alice had just killed her way into the control hall of the Swamp Tower and was fighting with the two wizard beasts guarding it. She was being chased by her opponents and had no chance to cause any damage. As for that Tick, under Wizard Anderson's command, he broke free from the execution chair and roared in a low voice as he charged towards Grimm, who had opened his eyes. Grimm let out a deep laugh. He stretched his tall body and raised his hands. A red barrier shot out from his body and enveloped an area of 50 meters around him. As soon as the evil bug Tick entered the red barrier, a strange elemental flame engulfed his body. The terrifying temperature evaporated the little water in his body, and the scorching heat roasted his body, making crackling sounds. In less than 3 seconds, his strong half-bug body was almost cooked by Grimm's flame barrier. Tick escaped the red barrier at an even faster speed. Although he had escaped, he had left behind large pieces of scorched and cracked carapace fragments on the ground. If he hadn't escaped fast enough, Grimm wouldn't have needed to fight him. Just the flame barrier alone could have turned him into a barbecue insect. Tick paced around the flame barrier for a long time, but he didn't dare to take step in. After becoming a magus, it was difficult for a quasi-wizard like Tick to be his opponent. With the AI, Chip's comprehensive elemental vision, Wizard Anderson, who was floating in the air by the whirlpool of wind, was no longer as mysterious as before. From the battle between him and the Flame Lord, Grimm had vaguely gathered some information about him. Chip, can you convert Anderson's battle abilities into data? Beep. Mission thread established. Initializing. Beep beep. Warning. Warning. This mission cannot be completed. Character data model error. Chip. Find a reason. Why can't I create a character model? Beep. Analysis of data. Error completed. The most likely reason is that the character model reference template is no longer suitable. Need to collect new data to reconstruct a magus character model. Grimm suddenly understood. After activating the AI chip, the first character model he created was based on a normal person. Using the body quality of a normal adult as the base data, he was able to construct an acolyte's strength. However, after becoming a magus, he couldn't use this basic template on Wizard Anderson. Thus, he couldn't successfully create a character model. Chip, expand the range of data collection. Include all the information of Magi in the database. Create the most basic data model based on magus-level creatures. Beep. Mission established. Beginning to extract magus data. Collecting samples include Anderson, Samir, Angus, Flower Spirit, Andre, Ender, Molten Core Giant. Constructing new data model. While the AI chip was busy constructing the new model, Grimm moved to the side of the flame giant and helped it block Wizard Anderson's attack. In less than a quarter of an hour, the flame giant was already riddled with holes. Its powerful fire spells caused the elemental barrier around Anderson to ripple and tremble. However, with the endless elemental energy from the Swamp Tower, it couldn't break through Anderson's defense at all. However, with the tower's defense, the Flame Lord would not be able to withstand Wizard Anderson's all-out attack. Fighting offense with offense, the Flame Lord's fire spell was broken by Anderson's wind spell in midair, and the remnant power of the spell still managed to puncture the lava armor on its body full of holes. If the Flame Lord wasn't an elemental creature, it would have already been defeated by Anderson's fierce attacks. Not wanting his most capable subordinate to be destroyed by Anderson, Grimm took the initiative to replace the Flame Lord and stood in front of Anderson. The Flame Lord turned around and pounced towards Mary, trying to save her first. "Lucky kid, don't think you can fight against me just because you've become a magus. Today, I'll let you know how big the gap between us is." Seeing Grimm, Wizard Anderson's sinister old face showed a hint of madness. Now that things had developed to this point, Anderson understood that his plan had been completely ruined. Even though his life wasn't in danger, the plan he had been thinking about day and night for 100 years was ruined by the hands of an unremarkable quasi-wizard. The hatred and unwillingness in his heart could no longer be described with words. With a trace of hope dashed, Anderson controlled endless wind and launched the fiercest attack on Grimm. It had only been 3 rounds, but Grimm had already experienced the pain the Lord of the Flames had been in. Anderson's elemental defense could not be broken at all. According to the AI, Chip's elemental strength, Anderson's elemental defense had a defense of 120 degrees. The degree here was actually a measurement that wizards use to standardize the basic data of attack and defense. It used the total energy that a magic crystal could stimulate as the lowest unit, which was 1 degree, and then quantified the various standards. A beginner acolyte could produce a spell that was between 1 to 5 degrees. An intermediate acolyte could produce between 5 to 10 degrees, and an advanced acolyte could produce between 15 to 20 degrees. As for a quasi-wizard, it was between 30 to 50 degrees. Anderson's elemental barrier was as high as 120 degrees. This meant that if Grimm's spell could not break through his defenses in one go, by the time the next spell was ready, Anderson's defenses would have already recovered to their peak. With the support of the Swamp Tower, Anderson didn't even need to think about defense. On the other hand, Grimm was having a hard time defending against Anderson's ferocious attacks. After all, Grimm had just advanced, and his flame barrier had not perfectly fused with his fire elemental affinity. His basic defense was only around 70 degrees, which was far behind his opponent. Chapter 157. The wizard battle between Grimm and Anderson was going to be a tough one. It had to be said that there was a huge gap between this newly advanced magus and a veteran magus like Anderson, be it in terms of battle experience or spellcasting ability. If the Swamp Tower's support and assistance to Anderson were taken into account, the battle was even more one-sided. It only took 5 minutes for Anderson to determine his advantage in battle. The violent wind tornadoes, with countless wind blades, broke through Grimm's witchcraft and brought the battle to Grimm's side. The Balrog transformation gave Grimm a tall and sturdy body, which allowed him to have a strong body and an almost endless amount of fire energy in a battle of witchcraft. However, once he lost the battle, the gap in his defense would become much bigger. Grimm was not an agility-type wizard. On the contrary, his biggest weakness was his agility. Therefore, Grimm, who had transformed into a tall man, stood firmly on the spot. The ground under his feet had melted into lava, and his body was surrounded by raging flames of the void in a 50-meter radius. Anyone who got close to him would have to bear endless fire damage. This might be able to help him establish some advantages when fighting against agility-type sorcerers. However, when he was facing an elemental wizard who did not need to worry about defense and only needed to attack, his weakness became very obvious. Wizard Anderson's elemental affinity was dark and wind elemental, so his spells were mainly wind elemental, but they also contained extremely corrosive dark elemental energy. The wound on Grimm's body that was cut by the wind blade was surrounded by faint black smoke. If he did not use a large amount of fire elemental energy to destroy the dark elemental energy, he would not be able to heal it quickly. This made the battle even more difficult for him. If the situation continued, even if Grimm used all his strength, he would still not be able to defend against Anderson's attack. Once he was defeated, this was a sealed alternate space, and there was no way for him to escape. Grimm lowered his body and inserted his left hand into the flowing lava under his feet. When he pulled his left hand out again, an entire 5 meters of the ground was pulled out and turned into a burning lava shield in front of him. The sound of wind blades slicing through the lava shield could be heard continuously. The lava shield blocked a tornado that was sweeping towards it. The terrifying wind blades that were wrapped in the vortex were like countless rotating steel blades, instantly cutting hundreds of crisscrossing deep grooves on the surface of the shield. Grimm roared as he lifted the lava shield. Both of his feet had sunk deep into the lava. Under his control, the scorching lava flowed up his body and replenished the shield in his hand. Unfortunately, before he could recover from the previous damage, an abnormally sharp wind spear smashed into the surface of the lava shield, instantly exploding into countless small wind blades and miniature wind vortexes that scattered everywhere. This time, the thickness of the lava shield was cut in half. The remaining thin layer was not enough to defend against the next attack. Grimm waved the flame scepter in his hand, and with the help of the secret voodoo scroll, 3 large-scale fire spells exploded around Anderson. Unfortunately, these attacks could only destroy the spell that Anderson was about to activate, but could not penetrate the elemental shield to harm him. In this situation, it was easier to injure the enemy in close combat. However, with Grimm's heavy and slow steps, it was impossible for him to catch up to Anderson, who was riding the endless wind. Grimm turned his head and roared angrily. "In Tick, I know you're here. Don't tell me you plan to wag your tail and beg that ugly monster after I lose. If you still want to be free, then come out. I need your help now." Grimm's target was obviously not in Tick, who was wandering around his flame barrier and waiting for an opportunity to sneak in. Instead, it was the consciousness of the evil worm that had formed a strategic alliance with him. At this moment, the situation of the battlefield in the sealed space could be seen at a glance. At present, there were only a few people still alive in the space. Apart from Anderson, who was floating in the air, there was only Grimm, who had advanced to become a fire magus, Mary, who had escaped from the execution chair and was entangled with the flame giant, Tick, who had become Anderson's loyal servant, and Cabby, who was hiding in the distance. At this time, the only thing that could help him was the consciousness of the evil worm that had disappeared. If it did not want to see the overall situation of the battle devolve into defeat and the hope of reclaiming its body, it had to come out and do something. Grimm shouted twice. Just as he was about to give up hope, there was finally a change in the field. Strange sounds of bones rubbing against each other could be heard. One by one, the corpses of the acolytes who had been dead for a long time began to struggle to their feet, dragging their twisted bodies and limbs as they staggered towards Anderson. At first, their movements were extremely slow and sluggish. However, in just a few seconds, their movements suddenly became agile. Each and every one of them ran, crawled, or leaped. Their bodies were as agile as monkeys. They climbed up from the bottom of the altar and madly surged towards Anderson, whose expression had changed slightly. At the same time, Tick, who did not do much at the beginning of the battle, suddenly began to tremble violently. His whole body was shaking like a sieve, and all kinds of beetles and scorpions kept falling out of his black robe. What was even more strange was that these insects had actually divided into 2 groups, forming 2 insect swarms, and began to crazily bite and kill each other. This guy has finally started to make his move. Grimm straightened his body and looked around the battlefield. The acolytes who had been turned into bugmen by the evil worms were long dead. Now, the ones controlling their bodies were just the hidden corpse-eating insects. They were like fearless warriors. They gathered under Wizard Anderson's body and formed a small pile of corpses. They kept jumping and biting at Wizard Anderson. After all, this was an enclosed space expanded by the power of the Wizard Tower. The height inside was always limited. Therefore, when the 30 acolytes stacked on top of each other, They really did have the intention to drag Wizard Anderson down into the air. Wizard Anderson's elemental shield was almost invincible against magic attacks, but it was not very effective against physical attacks in close combat. Wizard Anderson furiously threw a wind tornado onto the pile of corpses as he watched those ugly, twisted, and scary faces pouncing on him. The violent wind blades and the terrifying wind whirlpool instantly shredded them into pieces. However, in the next moment, a huge buzzing sound exploded. Countless terrifying flying insects poured out from the corpses of the acolytes, forming a dense black cloud that engulfed Wizard Anderson's body in an instant. This level of attack could only make Anderson's face dirty, but it would not be able to kill him. Therefore, seeing this scene, Grimm's eyes flashed, and he immediately threw out the trump card he had prepared for a long time. Magic Puppet's Self-Destruct. Under the command of his consciousness, the Magus rank Magic Puppet crystal core in Anderson's bosom exploded. This was a Magic Puppet crystal core that he had specially modified. During the last battle with Alice, he had only ignited one Flame Lord. Therefore, in Wizard Anderson's subconscious, Grimm only had one wizard-level Magic Puppet crystal core. Therefore, when Anderson had controlled Grimm's body and found that crystal core, he had let his guard down a little. He did not expect that Grimm had already hidden the other crystal core on Alice's body, and the one Anderson had left on him was a completely modified one. At this moment, when Wizard Anderson was wrapped up by the evil insects, Grimm finally gave the order to self-destruct. In the next second, a huge pillar of lava suddenly exploded in this enclosed space. The extreme temperature, the terrifying heat, the violent and ferocious lava, and the terrifying flame flow formed a world of lava that could kill all life. In an instant, it engulfed Wizard Anderson's location. The flying insects that were covering the sky and covering the earth were instantly dealt a fatal blow. Out of the tens of thousands of insects, only a handful could survive. Suddenly, a sharp and shrill insect hissed from the insects that were frantically fighting for control inside Tick's body. "Grimm, you bastard, you!" Unfortunately, before it could finish its curse, it was drowned by the even more terrifying insect hisses. Obviously, the battle and there was also extremely dangerous, and life and death could be decided in an instant. "You deserve it. Who told you to use me as a scapegoat? I hate being used by people the most. Consider this as a lesson to you. You should focus on the internal battle. Don't let your guard down and let the puppet's consciousness devour you. That would be even more interesting." Grimm sneered with disdain. In the distance, Anderson's figure was already covered by the violent elemental explosion and turbulence. No one could see what was going on inside, so Grimm could only turn around and walk towards Mary. The power of the bloodline could indeed help an acolyte grow faster, but once the source of the bloodline fell into the hands of the enemy, they would instantly become a puppet that had no control over their own body. At this moment, Mary had already turned into a berserk ghost assassin. She quickly circled around the Flame Lord, and the blood-red longbow in her hand continuously made explosive sounds, sending blood-red arrows into the enemy's body one after another. Obviously, the Flame Lord was only good at attacking. It was not good at restraining or capturing. Therefore, it crazily attacked a few times, but Mary always dodged it with her high agility. As its master's ally, the Fire Lord swore not to attack Mary recklessly. Therefore, when Grimm was fighting Anderson with all his might, the Flame Lord was tangled up by Mary. At this moment, Grimm's huge body swayed as he arrived at the battlefield. As soon as Mary crashed into his flame barrier, he instantly turned the flame in air into a chain of flames, tightly binding her and pulling her in front of him. Chapter 158. Even with Grimm's current strength, it was not enough to completely restrain Mary. The crimson armor on Mary's body blocked the flaming chains, which gave her some space to maneuver. He was the one who helped her modify this battle armor. Now that he had become Mary's accomplice, Grimm could not help but sigh in his heart. However, no matter how much Mary struggled, her tall and slender body was slowly pulled towards Grim. In the next second, Grim's fan-like lava hand grabbed Mary's head. The scorching red lava burned her skin and flesh in an instant, and an indescribable stench of roasting flesh and blood suddenly filled the air. Even with such torture, Mary could not break free from Anderson's mental shackles. She bared her white fangs and tried to intimidate Grim. She ignored the fact that her face had been roasted beyond recognition and continued to bite the lava hand in a frenzy. He could feel the life struggling desperately in his hands. Perhaps with just a little bit of force, this once beautiful head would explode in his hands like a smashed watermelon. At that time, he would be able to free up his hands to deal with the injured Anderson seriously. Otherwise, if he let Mary do as she pleased, even a small soldier could become an important bargaining chip to turn the tide of the battle. In order to solve this problem, he only needed to gently close his hands. Grim was caught in a dilemma due to the severity of the situation. However, at this moment, the raging sea of fire in the distance suddenly stopped, and a familiar figure staggered out. The self-destruction of the magic puppets had obviously caused great damage to Wizard Anderson's body. Visible to the naked eye, his body was covered with burn marks from the flames, and there were also some injuries on his face. It was obvious that it was the work of those black flying insects. His left eye was already blinded by the explosion, and blood kept flowing out of the dark hole. His wizard hat had also been blown away, and a few wisps of yellow hair on his skinny head danced in the wind. His remaining right eye was glinting with a cold light as he stared at Grim. His eyes were filled with a ferociousness that would not stop until death. This sudden explosion was obviously not something that could be stopped by the external elemental defense. Anderson's robe had been blown to shreds, leaving only strips of cloth that barely covered his body. His bony chest was covered with wounds of various sizes, and traces of smoke and fire could be seen everywhere. "You're good. You're good." Anderson's tone was laced with venom. "I didn't expect you to have such a trick up your sleeve. Very good. But a mere Magus crystal core can't kill me. Now it's your turn to die." With a towering rage, Anderson raised his right hand and loudly chanted a profound and cryptic incantation. Countless dark spears shot towards Grim like raindrops. Grim looked coldly at the overwhelming attacks and muttered, "3, 2, 1, explode." The entire sealed space suddenly shook, and the surging spatial fluctuations were visible to the naked eye. Strange cracking sounds came from the towering bloody altar. Countless fine cracks zigzagged along the stone walls like spider webs, and blood-red mist gushed out from inside, just like the blood flowing out of a wounded human. The elemental defense around Anderson's body was not completely destroyed even by the explosion of a Magus crystal core. But this time, for some reason, it began to tremble and shatter into pieces. The tight connection between Anderson and the Swamp Tower was suddenly cut off. Wizard Anderson was stunned at first, but then he suddenly realized something. He roared in anger, "It's Alice. It's that hateful little girl. I'm going to tear each and every one of you into 1,000 pieces and make the ugliest and evilest corpses. I'll bind your souls inside forever. You all deserve to die." Grim, who had transformed into a flame demon, smiled and said, "You should go deal with her first." As soon as he finished speaking, a red light flashed in Grim's hand, and a strange spell entered Mary's head. He then lifted her up and threw her at Anderson. It was like a signal, and a new battle erupted in an instant. The Flame Lord rushed towards Anderson with heavy steps, and a series of lava fireballs were crazily thrown towards him. Grim, on the other hand, was hiding in the back. He opened his hand, and the secret scroll of voodoo on his waist automatically appeared in his hand. As the spell book automatically opened, the pages flipped rapidly. Every time the parchment stopped at a certain position, a violent fire element spell would be activated and fiercely hit Anderson. The pages of the scroll kept flipping, and the fire spell kept being unleashed. Wizard Anderson's body was immediately engulfed by a monstrous flame. Flaming storm, chain fireball, exploding flame pillar. Ignition spell. Poison flame spell. The violent fire spells almost turned the entire area into a sea of fire. It was mixed with physical attacks and poison attacks, making it hard for anyone to resist. However, all of this directly collided with the shattering sound waves unleashed by Anderson. Both sides were locked in a fierce confrontation in the middle of the field. The elemental turbulence that was spilled out washed everything in the field, turning them into tiny residue that could not be seen by the naked eye. Afterward, it wildly scattered towards the far end of the sealed space. Anderson roared as he charged out of the sea of fire once again. The wind barrier that he had temporarily erected around him was smashed into pieces, and a few more wounds appeared on his body. However, Anderson's illusory hand was grasping a tattered human body. It was badly mutilated, and there was not a single piece of undamaged skin on the body. It seemed like he had used Mary's body as a shield to barely dodge the combined attack of Grimm and the Flame Lord. Without the continuous energy injection from the Swamp Tower, Anderson had lost his elemental protection. In a one-on-two situation, his little bit of battle experience and spellcasting skills were not worth mentioning. The battle quickly reached its climax. Anderson soared into the sky once again, riding on endless wind as he flew through the sky. He unleashed large-scale tornadoes, sonic blasts, Black Dragon Spear, and wind blades to ambush Grimm. Grimm and the Flame Lord chased after him, using even more violent fire core explosions, lava fireballs, and flaming storm to counterattack. Powerful elemental spells streaked through the air, exploding into fireworks when they hit Anderson's external protection. Some were dodged by Anderson and shot to the edge of the sealed space, turning it into a sea of fire or a whirlpool of wind. Kobe, who was carefully hiding in the distance with an invisibility spell, crouched on the ground. He held his head with his hands as he looked at the terrifying spells streaking across his head. The fear in his heart could not be any greater. Every fireball that exploded not far away from it would splash up a large amount of dirt and gravel, leaving its body bruised and bruised. However, Kobe did not care. He opened his eyes wide and tried his best to determine which spell would land on his head. Mighty Goblin God, please don't let any spells land on my head. The sealed space was not small, but it could not withstand the unbridled destruction of two magi and a wizard rank monster. The Goblin Kabi was obviously not praying to the local gods of the Magus world. Hence, no matter how much he prayed, there was still a magma fireball dragging thick black smoke towards him. Damn it, I hope you didn't lie to me. As he screamed in fear, Kobe fished out a strange round ball from his pocket and threw it fiercely at his feet. After a loud explosion, a huge crater with a diameter of 5 meters appeared on the ground. The surface of the crater was covered in cracks, like a spider's web. Violent flames and a sea of fire instantly engulfed every inch of the surrounding space. Under such a powerful elemental attack, even a quasi-wizard would find it hard to protect himself, let alone an acolyte below that level. However, when the terrifying elemental explosion slowly subsided, a transparent energy barrier was revealed in the crater. Kobe was curled up inside, his face ashen, his eyes filled with brilliant fireworks. The energy barrier did not last long, but it had allowed him to safely avoid the stray bullet's attack. Feeling his body a few times, Kobe pinched his thigh fiercely, causing him to jump up in pain. Gazlo, I love you. I shouldn't have doubted you. The gnome cabbie didn't have the slightest bit of doubt towards this complete energy deflection defense Goblin Type 3. Although it consumed 10 magic crystals every time it was activated, no amount of magic crystals was more precious than his life. Cabbie immediately fished out 2 goose egg-sized energy barrier generators from his bosom. He looked at the distant core battlefield that was in full swing, grinning foolishly as he said, Come, this daddy isn't scared anymore. He had been fearful of the stray bullets in the sky just now, but now he was looking forward to something that would allow him to test out the treasure in his hands. It had to be said that after this period of coaxing and pestering, Kobe had really managed to obtain some strange things from the goblin engineer Gazlu. Although the names of these things sounded grand, and each of them had miraculous abilities that outsiders could not imagine. However, anyone who had dealt with goblins knew that they were very mysterious, but very unstable. Just as Kobe was about to try out this miraculous energy barrier for the second time, it actually exploded. Fortunately, the small explosion caused by the energy barrier generator had sent Kobe flying more than 10 meters away, just enough to avoid the explosion. Otherwise, even if Kobe didn't die, he would have lost a layer of skin. Kobe crawled up in a hurry and looked at the residue of the generator that had been melted into molten iron in the sea of fire. His legs trembled in fear. That damn Gazlu. He actually sold me a fake product. Wait till I get back. I'll make you pay. Chapter 159. The power of an experienced wizard was far beyond what a normal person could imagine. Even after the self-destruction of the magic puppet, the destruction of the control center of the Swamp Tower, and the joint attack of Grimm and the Flame Lord, Wizard Anderson's battle prowess was still far above everyone else. At this moment, the AI chip, which had been silent for a long time, finally completed the reconstruction of its damned model. Beep. Reconstruction of character model completed. Would you like to display it now? Display. Display it now. Grimm replied impatiently. Beep. Character data is as follows. Anderson, rank 1 human elemental wizard, proficient in wind and dark elements. Strength, 1. 2. Agility, 1. 3. Constitution, 2. 1. Spirit, 8. 4. Then what about my stats? Beep. Character data is as follows. Grimm, rank 1 human elemental wizard, proficient in fire element. Strength, 4. 6. 1. 4. Agility, 0. 6. 0. 8. Constitution, 3. 6. 1. 2. Spirit, 1. 6. 0. 9. Currently in flame demon transformation state. Looking at the stats of his body, Grimm suddenly understood the huge difference between a newly advanced wizard and a veteran wizard. Now that he was in the special state of the flame demon transformation, his stats had all skyrocketed, except for agility. His strength and vitality were already stronger than that wizard Anderson. However, the most important attribute of a wizard, the spirit, was far weaker than his opponent. If he didn't have the flame demon transformation state, perhaps the numbers in brackets would be his real stats. From the data provided by the AI chip, Anderson's spirit attribute was not much higher than Grimm's. It was only 8 or 9 times. If factors such as battle environment, battle skills, and spellcasting experience were taken into consideration, even though there was a huge difference in stats, there was still a chance for a fight. Although Wizard Anderson was not a research-type wizard that was good at fighting, as an experienced wizard, he still had a lot of achievements in his own witchcraft that no one else could compare with. His talent was compatible with the wind and dark elements, so Wizard Anderson had found a way to fuse the dark elements into his wind spells. This way, any type of wind element spell that he stimulated would be able to inflict terrifying wind and dark element damage to the opponent after hitting them. As for personal protection, after losing the support of the Swamp Tower, Anderson had no choice but to cast a wind barrier to avoid the terrifying radiation damage of the fire spells. As for those spells that he couldn't dodge, Anderson would use Mary as a shield. This way, he could make Mary help him block the attack, and he could also make that damned Grimm hesitate. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone, so why not? However, he didn't know that the charred corpse he had raised in front of him to block the spear had 2 thin lines split open on its face, revealing a cold, red glow within. The talisman that Grimm had placed into Mary's body before he threw her out had finally worked. Mary was in a daze, and the intense pain from the surface of her body was nothing to her anymore. Inside her body, under the influence of an unknown factor, her blood was slowly heating up and gradually boiling. Scorching hot blood surged through his scorched body. Wherever it passed, his internal organs, which had already been modified by vampires, were also activated, constantly spewing out powerful life force. This was the strange energy that had been absorbed during the blood sacrifice ritual but had not been digested yet. Now that his physical body was severely damaged, this strange energy was transformed into life energy by the vampire's powerful instinct to repair his severely damaged body. The temperature of her blood was still slowly rising, as if her veins were filled with red-hot molten iron. Fine cracks began to appear on Mary's scorched skin, and hot air spewed out from within. Mary, whose bloodline was controlled by Anderson's willpower rune, couldn't help but let out a painful scream. Under the interference of this powerful external force, Mary's vampire instinct had finally suppressed Anderson's order. The charred corpse opened its scorched mouth and spat out a hot steam. Mary was back. Wizard Anderson, who was in the middle of a fierce attack, suddenly felt something was wrong with his hands. The vampire he was holding in front of him seemed to be... He didn't have much time to think. The originally motionless, charred corpse suddenly turned its head and smiled at him. Inside the pitch-black mouth, the ghastly white teeth were a ghastly sight, and the two blood-sucking fangs grew even faster, directly protruding out of his lips. In the next second, the charred corpse suddenly opened its mouth and viciously bit on Anderson's neck. He had just used a black dragon spear to pierce through the Lord of the Flames magma armor. He was about to throw a wind vortex into its wound to inflict more damage that would be hard to recover from when the dark dragon spear struck him. But at that moment, Mary, who he had been holding in his hand, suddenly turned against him. The shock Wizard Anderson felt could no longer be described with words. Wizard Anderson screamed madly. His hands quickly condensed hundreds of wind whirlpools the size of fingernails and sent them into Mary's body. Every wind whirlpool was like a small flesh shredder. No matter how strong a person's body was, they would not be able to defend against it. Bones, tendons, and flesh were like cheese in front of a drill. They could not stop them at all. When hundreds of these terrifying things exploded inside Mary's body, the damage they brought to Mary was self-explanatory. In the next second, Mary's chest and abdomen were split open. Dark purple blood, broken intestines, internal organs that had been minced in a meat paste, and unidentifiable flesh and blood dregs splattered out from inside. Anderson, who was tightly hugging Mary, was dyed in blood. If it was anyone else, they would have died from the pain. But Mary did not react at all. Instead, her fingernails grew crazily. She used all her strength to hold herself on Anderson's body and sucked on his sweet blood. The sound of her gulping could be heard clearly. At that moment, Mary no longer looked like a human. From the neck down, the flesh on the front of her body was almost hollowed out. Her abdomen was even more empty. Only broken blood vessels and minced meat were hanging on her twisted spine. Apart from that, all of her organs were gone. However, even without these organs, the blood that flowed down the throat did not disperse. It was as if there were some completely transparent organs and blood vessels there. The blood that carried abundant elemental energy flowed in the empty chest and abdomen, using the red blood flow to re-outline the contours and positions of the various organs. Mary's heart had long since been blown to smithereens. But at this moment, dozens or even hundreds of blood streams converged at the front of the spine and twisted together. In a short span of 3 fingers, the blood was used to reconstruct the shape of a heart. The blood on the outer layer quickly dried and solidified, forming a thin layer of blood membrane. Through the translucent blood membrane, one could clearly see more blood condensing inside, forming a complete heart. A soft thud sounded. His heart skipped a beat, and he began to carry out his duties and obligations. Soon, Mary's empty chest and abdomen were covered by a layer of blood membrane. Under the blood membrane, countless bones and organs were growing and wriggling. It was like a shocking meat factory. It was just that the raw material was Anderson's blood, and the result was a completely new body. Compared to a child's play like repairing her body, the changes in Mary's mental fluctuations were truly shocking. From being on the verge of death at the beginning to having an exuberant vitality, and then to the explosive increase of her spiritual power, the changes that happened to her body were like riding a roller coaster. The ups and downs of the plot were astounding. Unlike Mary's vigor, Wizard Anderson, who was being pestered by her, had his flesh and blood corroded very quickly. His body shriveled up. He had activated 3 or 4 spells in a row, almost turning Mary into a sieve of blood, but he still could not pull her off his body. Wizard Anderson felt his body was losing blood and life force, so he reached out his trembling right hand towards Mary's head. He wanted to use a spell to destroy this source of disaster. Unfortunately, his hand was caught by Grimm's flaming whip before he could even extend it. Mary, take this opportunity to condense your own blood core. Whether you're a dragon or a worm, it all depends on this. Grimm's deep roar filled with power exploded in Mary's mind. Mary's body trembled. She seemed to have understood something. The wizard blood she absorbed was no longer repairing her body. Instead, a large amount of it was gathered in her newly condensed heart, and it began to collide with each other. Seeing Mary's process of becoming a wizard was getting more and more difficult, Grimm fiercely stomped his foot. Under the terrifying injection of his fire elemental energy, the blood altar that had been ravaged by the war finally let out its last breath. It was squeezed out the last bit of energy. The violent and turbulent energy crazily rushed into Mary's body and rushed into the vampire's heart that had become a blood furnace. If it was any other quasi-wizard who was invaded by this kind of terrifying energy when they were advancing to become a wizard, they would definitely turn into a giant bloody firework. No one could absorb different types of energy from the outside world without a filter, but vampires were not afraid. The powerful bloodline talent of vampires gave their blood a terrifying ability to assimilate. Any type of energy could be turned into blood energy, and any type of bloodline could only be turned into vampires. In the records of the wizards, only vampires could assimilate other people's bloodline energy, but no one had ever succeeded in assimilating a vampire's bloodline. There was no reason. The bloodline talent of vampires was just this overbearing. Chapter 160. After handing over the task of protecting Mary to the Flame Lord, Grimm began to clean up the battlefield. His spiritual connection with Alice had long since been severed for unknown reasons. Grimm could vaguely sense that something had changed in the outside world. In order to prevent himself from being at a loss, Grimm felt that it was best to adjust himself to his peak condition before going out. The storage belt that Anderson had taken away was taken back, along with the witchcraft equipment. It was a pity that since he had successfully advanced to become a magus, these acolyte equipment were no longer of any use to him. However, at this moment, the rubble not far away rumbled, and a short, hazy green figure appeared. Master, you've really become a magus. That's great. Congratulations, Master. Grimm could not help but reveal an expression of surprise as he looked at the cheerful and flattering goblin cabbie. During the earth-shattering battle, the berserk spells had practically plowed through the entire sealed space. Even the blood altar protected by the spell formation had collapsed, yet this goblin servant who did not have much power to protect himself had actually survived. It seemed like this fellow had some secrets that no one knew about. Grimm snorted with a fake smile. Go search this place. All the spoils of war left behind by the acolytes are yours. Thank you, Master. Thank you. Cabbie was so happy that his voice had become distorted. Although Cabbie had not displayed much of his strength in this battle, the fact that he had braced himself to replace Alice was already praiseworthy. Hence, Grimm waved his hand and gave Cabbie the authority to plunder the battlefield. After all, the acolyte equipment and items were no longer of much use to him. Furthermore, there was something more important waiting for him to do. Grimm strode forward and quickly arrived in front of a pile of rubble. He threw an explosive fireball at it, and all the rubble was blown away, revealing a wriggling black robe. Did you think I'd forget about you, Intik? It seems like we'll have to settle the score between us, Grimm said coldly. Since the main enemy had been killed, this ally, with ulterior motives, couldn't be left alive. A ball of lava wrapped in raging flames was thrown at the black robe. The explosive elemental flames tore the robe into pieces. Countless black scorpions shrieked in pain as they were incinerated into ashes in the column of flames. Grimm focused his senses again. After confirming that he had missed out on anything, he turned around and left the sea of fire that had turned into a mini lava pond. By that point, Mary had already sucked every last drop of blood from Wizard Anderson. She was floating 3 meters above the ground, naked. She hugged her knees and curled up into a ball. Strands of blood-colored waves were constantly flowing out of her body. Wizard Anderson's dead body laid on top of a pile of gravel. His withered skin stuck to his bones. Not much flesh could be seen on his body. He had completely turned into a mummy. He had enjoyed Wizard Anderson's blood all by himself. For a vampire that lived on blood, this was definitely the most precious nourishment. Especially at this critical moment when Mary was about to forcefully level up, it had become the most powerful aid for Mary. A condensed force suddenly burst out from Mary's body. She stretched her body and stepped into the air. She raised her head and let out a sharp scream that could pierce through stone. Smooth and translucent skin, curvaceous and plump body, straight and slender snow-white legs, scarlet eyes that were as bright as rubies, and bright red hair that hung loosely behind her. When her naked and delicate feet had just stepped on the ground, a red mist had already enveloped her body. After a while, when the red mist dissipated, Mary's body was covered in a perfect, beautiful, blood-red armor. She was smiling at Grimm. "I really have to thank you this time. Otherwise, it would be really hard for me to level up. Did you leave any side effects? It's not that easy to control a wizard. When I was condensing my blood core, I had already erased all the restraints on my soul. From now on, I'm truly free." Mary was obviously in a good mood after successfully becoming a wizard. She had only exchanged a few words with Grimm before she could not help but check the changes in her body after leveling up. With just a slight push from her feet, Mary's lightning-fast figure quickly moved around the field like a ghost. As she ran, she used the tip of her foot to kick up a millstone-sized gravel. Her figure then flashed through the stones. What was left behind her were pieces of broken rocks. Grimm casually picked up a piece of gravel and looked at it. The edges were smooth. It was obvious that Mary's attack power had increased by leaps and bounds. What was more rare was that when Grimm used a bit of force, the gravel would fall to the ground. It had been corroded by Mary's blood energy and could not withstand a single blow. Mary's figure flickered, and her slender body actually left a series of blurry shadows in the void. Sometimes she would turn into a small bat and fly close to the ground, and sometimes she would turn into her human form and move quickly. For a moment, 6 or 7 afterimages of different figures appeared in the field at the same time. Every afterimage was so realistic that it was hard to tell which one was the real one. While Mary was testing her strength, Grimm's black eyes flashed with blue light, and he quickly gathered enough data. Thus, the latest data of Mary's body after becoming a wizard was immediately projected into Grimm's mind. Mary, rank 1 bloodline wizard. Vampire, proficient in blood magic. Strength, 2. 6 agility. 4. 7 vitality. 2. 6 spiritual force. 0. 7. Seeing Mary's data, Grimm's heart was filled with envy. Without the support of the Balrog transformation, his body's quality would not be comparable to Mary's. Although bloodline sorcerers mastered fewer sorcery, they had a strong body that complemented their own sorcery. Fortunately, Grimm had magic puppets to support him. Otherwise, he would not have an advantage in a one-on-one fight with Mary. Since Mary had successfully advanced, there was no point in staying in this sealed space. Grimm called out to Mary and grabbed Cabby with one hand as he walked toward the edge of the space. As he walked, Grimm's body began to emit boiling hot flames. After becoming a wizard, Grimm's control over the fire particles had become more and more proficient. Under his command, a A crimson pillar of fire struck the spatial barrier, quickly eroding a large hole large enough to pass through. Although the pillar of fire was terrifyingly hot, it did not hurt Mary and Cabby at all. From this, it could be seen that Grimm's innate talent in fire was not a small improvement. As for where the sealed space was located, the two did not know. In order to obtain the support of the swamp tower, Wizard Anderson would not set it too far away. It must still be inside the magic swamp. When the two broke through the barrier and exited the secret area, they realized that they were deep underground. Grimm closed his eyes and sensed that he was only about 20 meters above the ground. After saying goodbye to Mary, his body exploded into a pillar of fire. When the few of them disappeared, there was a sudden change in the empty secret area. After Grimm and the others had swept through this place, other than a pile of rubble, the only thing left was Wizard Anderson's horrifying mummy. However, when Grimm's aura disappeared, the largest pile of rubble in the center of the secret area collapsed, and a group of black scorpions spewed out. Compared to their peak, there were less than 100 of these black scorpions. They were in dire straits. At the very center of the black scorpions, a particularly thick black beetle had the face of Intek's shrunken face on its back. Seeing that the secret area in the distance could no longer maintain its structure and was slowly collapsing, Intek let out an angry hissing sound. "You want to kill me? Grimm, don't even think about doing it in this lifetime. You don't want this corpse, but it's mine. Once I devour it and become a wizard, your good days will come to an end." While hissing, Intek commanded the swarm of insects to overturn Anderson's remains. Soon, there was only the terrifying sound of gnawing that made one's teeth ache and legs go weak. The once mysterious and gloomy magic swamp had now become a true death zone. Under the cover of the thick fog, a ball of fire suddenly burst into the sky above a deserted garden. This ball of fire left as quickly as it had come. When the scattered flames disappeared without a trace, 3 strange figures of different heights appeared in the center of the torch. Since it was his first time using fire to teleport, Grimm's control of the distance was not perfect. Thus, the 3 of them appeared in the air 10 meters above the ground. Of course, Mary was very familiar with floating in the air, but Grimm obviously could not do it. Thus, along with a soft cry of alarm, Grimm and Cabby fell to the ground like weights. On the ground, a nascent monster that was dragging its body and wandering aimlessly was startled by the explosion of flames above its head. Just as it stared blankly at the strange figures that suddenly appeared, their huge bodies actually grew bigger and bigger in front of its eyes. The infant monster that came back to its senses screamed and tried to escape. Unfortunately, it was too late. In the next second, with a muffled thud, Grimm landed firmly on the ground, stirring up a huge cloud of dust. "It's the Whispering Garden. I can't believe that Anderson actually opened up a secret area under the Whispering Garden. He really did it secretly." Mary slowly descended beside Grimm, her scarlet eyes looking at the swamp tower in the distance that was faintly discernible in the fog. Just as the two of them looked at each other, puzzled by the silence in front of them, the light in front of them changed, and their heads became dizzy. In the blink of an eye, they actually appeared in the 5th floor of the tower, and in front of them was a cold and proud old man in a black robe. "You've all advanced to become wizards? Where's that Anderson?" The old man did not speak much, but the terrifying pressure of a high-ranked magus caused Grimm and Mary's expressions to change. The goblin Cabby directly lay on the ground, trembling uncontrollably. Chapter 161. It was still the same magic hall. The 3 wizards stood there quietly, looking at Grimm and Mary, who were trapped in the same place with a suspicious look. In the corner of the hall, Alice was lying there peacefully. She seemed to have lost consciousness. Out of the 3, Grimm only knew the wizard called Kogan. Needless to say, the other 2 were also wizards from the Salubo family, especially the black-robed old man with a cold face. Although he didn't have any shocking power of will, when Grimm looked at him, he could feel a chill in his bones. "Is Anderson dead?" the black-robed old man asked coldly. When he opened his mouth, the other two wizards did not say anything. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Grimm wanted to say something, but he didn't know how these wizards from the Solubo family would deal with them. He didn't want to say too much, so he just nodded. Idiot. He really is an idiot. A coward like him, who doesn't even dare to step onto the battlefield, was actually killed by a sorcerer apprentice that he nurtured. He really is stupid enough. The black-robed old man tilted his face and instructed, "Go and see what's left of Anderson." Wizard Kogan bowed and left. If the secret plane was not broken, it would be very difficult to find it. However, Grimm had just corroded a big hole in the secret plane's dimensional barrier, so it would be very easy to find it. A moment later, Corgan had already returned, and in his hand was Anderson's remains. However, what made them slightly change their expressions was that the inside of the body had been eaten into a human shape. Countless black scorpions were crawling in and out of it. "He's really dead," the black-robed old man said coldly. "It seems like his preparations have benefited you guys." Good, good, good. An idiot in exchange for 3 wizards. It's not a bad deal. Grimm lowered his head to hide the shock in his eyes. From the words of this Tier 2 magus, it was not hard to tell that the Solubo family knew Anderson's every move very well, including the blood sacrifices he had secretly arranged. If Wizard Anderson's plan was successful, and he successfully became a rank 2 wizard, these people in front of him would be here to congratulate him and sign a new contract with him. This cold reality revealed a truth that frightened Grimm. In the eyes of these official sorcerers, the lives of apprentices were basically resources that could be used at will. Perhaps the higher-ups of the Magi organizations strictly forbade this sort of behavior, but for the various Magus families, as long as they could increase their own family strength, it was fine to do things in secret. Since the Solubo family also hoped that Wizard Anderson could succeed, then how would they deal with him and Mary now? Damn it, I should have thoroughly searched the secret place just now. That demonic insect Indic was actually not killed by me. From the looks of it, he had borrowed the remaining magic power in Anderson's body to advance to become a magus. Grimm's mind was in a mess, so he stopped thinking about it and held his breath, waiting for the Tier 2 wizard's decision. Magi were the most precious assets of any family. They could not be easily abandoned or wasted, so killing them to avenge Anderson would definitely not happen. It was very likely that they would have to face a contract that was much harsher than normal. This was something that Grimm had already predicted. What are you still hiding in there for? Come out and let me see what kind of person was able to devour Anderson to the point where not even his bones remained. Under the cold pressure of the Tier 2 wizard, countless scorpions crazily poured out from the eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and other orifices of the human skin, and once again condensed into Indic's horrifying half-insect body. Facing a Tier 2 wizard, even Indic, who was usually gloomy and reserved, trembled with fear. He bowed respectfully and stood to the side, waiting for the other party's decision. Corgan's cold gaze swept over Anderson's remaining skin, then glanced at Grimm and the other two. He turned around and asked, "Lord Forgan, how do you think we should deal with them? What's there to think about? After signing the contract, throw them into the planar battlefield. This was originally Anderson's job, but since he's not here, let the 3 of them take over. Those who survive will naturally enjoy the treatment of the family's Magi. If they don't, they can only blame themselves for being unlucky." Hearing this, although Grimm and the other two's hearts sank, they invisibly let out a sigh of relief. What was the planar battlefield? Why had they never heard of it? Was it really that dangerous? A series of questions surfaced in his mind. Although Grimm had used the AI chip to organize and summarize most of the magic knowledge and ancient legends available to acolytes, he still knew very little about the planar wars. Even if there were some books that touched on the planar wars, they were only bits and pieces and were vague, making it hard for people to understand the details. The reason for this situation was most likely related to the Magi's lockdown of information. It seemed that everything related to the planar wars was not something normal acolytes could get involved in. After Magus Anderson's torment, all the acolytes had died underground. This had completely paralyzed the magic swamp resource point. Among the three magi who rushed over from the family, other than Lord Forgan, who was holding the fort, and Wizard Corgan, who was more familiar with the area, there was also another magus who had rushed over to take over the swamp tower in Anderson's place. With an official magus presiding over this place, in another 3 to 5 years, this place would once again be bustling with noise and excitement. However, Grim, Mary, and Intich could only follow Lord Forgan back to the family's encampment and wait for the planar wars to begin. In the blink of an eye, the magic swamp that he had lived in for 7 years had become a memory of Grim's long life. Cerubo family's encampment, Ferdinand City. Grim walked through the bustling streets with a solemn expression and silently entered a small secret shop facing the street. This was a small gnome shop that specialized in selling rare and strange alchemy items. The owner, the gnome KB, was currently standing on a wooden stool, spittle flying everywhere as he enthusiastically promoted the miraculous alchemy equipment he had bought from a certain unscrupulous gnome merchant to 3 acolytes, 2 females and 1 male. The rocket boots that could instantly propel the user forward. But please make sure there are no rocks or ditches in front of you before activating. The alchemy bomb that could make terrifying noises. Sometimes it would explode by itself. So the magic core that could create a full energy shield. Remember, pick up the magic core and knock it on the ground to see the energy shield. If you don't see it, please knock it a few more times. The goblin flying machine that could take you anywhere in the sky. Of course, it was absolutely anywhere. The parachute cloak that could allow you to safely return to the ground. This seems to be the standard of the previous item. Otherwise, it would be a problem for you to come down after you fly. Free landing is also a good choice. Grim frowned as he looked at the goblin alchemy equipment in the shop. Although his heart was filled with disdain, he did not say anything. This kind of thing was completely useless to him at the moment, but it was a good choice for the sorcerer acolytes who lacked the means to save their lives. Although there were always problems with the items sold by the goblin shop, once they were put to use, they could save their lives in times of crisis. At least in the month since Cabby opened the shop, no acolytes had come to ask for a refund. Of course, that was if they were still alive to ask for a refund. Seeing Grim's arrival, Cabby immediately gave up on the 3 acolytes. He jumped off the stool and ran to his owner, bowing and greeting him. The 3 acolytes were originally unhappy, but when they turned their heads and saw the dark red wizard robe on Grim's body, they immediately bowed and slowly left the goblin shop. They had long heard that this unremarkable goblin shop was backed by a newly advanced wizard, but this was the first time they had seen it with their own eyes. They held their breaths until they were about 100 meters away before they dared to breathe again. That lord is so handsome. His physique is so strong. And he's even taller than Hans by a head. Yes, especially that dark red hair of his. Coupled with his young and handsome face, he's simply too handsome. Hearing the 2 female acolytes shouting in admiration, the male acolyte could not help but grumble. You guys are too bold. That's an official magus. Didn't you hear those old acolytes repeatedly telling you not to look at an official magus in the eye? If the other party has some sort of taboo, he might even punish you in front of you. Also, the appearance of a magus can't be trusted. He looks young, but he might be an old man over 100 years old. One of the female acolytes curled her lips in disdain. Hans, don't be jealous. We've already asked around about Lord Grim. He's a young magus who's not even 20 years old, and he advanced in a place you've never even heard of. Yes, I've heard about him too. Another female acolyte could not help but say, I heard that he came to the family with 2 other magi, especially that magus Mary. She's simply an idol that all of us female acolytes admire. Not only is she extremely beautiful, but she also has great battle strength. I heard that she defeated Lord Keel, who advanced a few hundred years ago. What? She defeated Lord Keel? How is that possible? Lord Keel is a famous body refiner in the family. By the way, have you seen that Lord Demonic Worm? I heard that he looks terrifying. That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.